All right, so we, Ben, have never seen Led Zeppelin, but we've seen a tribute band a few times in Champaign, and they're still around. They've been around for like 25 years, I'm pretty sure, but their name is Zoso. And they would come around to the Canopy Club, which is a converted movie theater and now music venue. And when we were in college especially, they seemed to come around once a year. So I'm guessing that your first exposure to the album that we're about to talk about was not necessarily me playing it at Blue Box, because I don't know if I did that when we lived together, but probably the fact that Zoso actually did a pretty spot-on version of Achilles' Last Stand, all 11 minutes of it. And I remember the first time I saw them do that, I thought, that's pretty goddamn impressive. So do you recall specifically them playing that? Or are those Zoso shows kind of all muddled together?
Yeah, there's a lot that's muddled together simply because we were young and just diving into what it was like to experience the finer things in life in terms of pre-gaming and also getting lucky enough to potentially get a beer or some cocktails at the Canopy Club, those years. So I think it all blends together in terms of the music, but I do recall, and I think I was maybe briefly just getting you caught up on this, but in the deep dive of this album, only being 7 tracks, I was able to kind of do a little bit more fandom deep dive on what the acclaim now, then, and has been for what Presence is. And a lot of people swear by the Nebworth version of Achilles' Last Stand. So it kind of made me revisit that. And then as I heard, obviously, if I heard the record version and I've heard the Nebworth version now a few times, I distinctly remember the mannerisms and the energy that came with that song at the Canopy Club, but I wouldn't have ever been able to pick it out to say, hey, I've heard Zoso play this, over and over again. So
to me, yeah. there is, and the reason I bring that song up is it is the cornerstone of this album. It's the lead-off track. It's the one most people know, but it really speaks to the fact that Zoso, they were a good tribute band. They're still around. I'm sure they're still excellent. But the fact is you watched the Nebworth right before we hopped on, and I've seen that multiple times too. It is a great example of how latter-day Zeppelin, while there were flaws in the last year or two, and Jimmy was kind of really falling into the throes of heroin addiction, sadly, they pretty much nail that Nebworth version. And as you were watching it, and you're watching the 3 instrumentalists specifically, which one do you think had the heaviest load? Because I think an argument could be made for any of them as far as who has the hardest 11 minutes in the song.
Yeah,
wouldn't your fingers, as a bass player, wouldn't your fingers eventually just start bleeding midway through that track the way that John Paul Jones plays it?
I would imagine, but that, to be honest, is like, I'm going to say a statement, the same could be said for each instrumentalist and vocalist in the band, but a song like Achilles' Last Stand is the song you dream of as a bass player. Like you're constantly going, but if you hit into what it's called the pocket, you're just sort of immersed by the song. I don't think at any point any of them were necessarily thinking I'm done with this song or I'm exhausted. But if one singular person had more of a workload than the next, it's hard not to take note on Bonham, just the way he approaches the song and the way he looks the entire time. Now, obviously, the Nebworth version also has drenched Jimmy Page in sweat, but he's also just in the pocket feeling it, and I think enjoying every single second of it. So I wouldn't even necessarily say that any of them felt they had a load per se, because to me, the biggest takeaway from Nebworth is that it looks like they're all having an absolute ball. It's just a rock solid fucking song. So like you watch that live version and you're caught up in it. You're like, shit, man. It's a great album song, but then you watch that live version and it's like watching any of our favorite bands when they're just looking at each other and they're just in that absolute pocket of madness. And you're like, shit, dude, this is a capture. I'm captivated right now.
Yeah, so. They actually, in their later years, because they only played this in 77, at Nebworth in 79, and then their 1980 tour. So they did play it their last 3 years, or last 3 tours. And oddly enough, as complex as that song is, we aren't even doing the track-by-track breakdown now, but it was one of their better live tracks. In other words, they were really consistent with it, and I don't think it's an easy song to be consistent with. And the irony, if you want to call it that, is that I think a year or maybe 2 later, Heart with Barracuda essentially boiled Achilles' Last Stand down to a 4-minute single and had a big hit, a bigger hit than Achilles Last Stand was because you couldn't play it on any AM radio at all. And a question I'll ask you is, would you rather listen to Achilles Last Stand or Barracuda? And you know how big of a Zeppelin fan I am. I got to think about that, and I know that might be blasphemy to certain Zeppelin fans, but I don't know. I mean, it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison in some ways, but they're also offshoots of one. Like Barracuda specifically is an offshoot of Achilles Last Stand.
I find that a fantastic question, and I'm going to paint the picture for why. I often kind of explain things based on like my wife or some of my friends that might not be at all into Led Zeppelin. I could show pretty much anybody Barracuda live, and I think that they would last from start to finish, and they would have some kind of resonating feeling about it. All due respect to this amazing band and our listeners and passionate Zeppelin fans across the universe. I'm going to go out on a limb and say my wife would make it through Emily, I love you. Like a minute and a half, 2 minutes of Achilles Last Stand, and I would probably look over and she's scrolling her phone. Not that it's boring. It's just, it is like, it's a lot. It is immersive, but I think you have to be just a little bit into the fandom and the band to truly appreciate the guys you're watching and what's happening on stage. If you're watching the Nebworth, if you're just listening to it, kind of the same format. Like, it's enjoyable, but Barracuda is
tight
and just a.
I don't feel bad asking that question, only knowing how big a Zeppelin fan's heart was in the first place.
For sure.
I mean, they were clearly influenced by it, and they opened their shows in the 70s with rock and roll. Yeah,
very vocal and very, very adamant about their love for Zeppelin, which I think is great. You know, a thought came to my head, Mike, and the precursors of hit and record tonight. We sort of dove into it, but I want to bring it back up here too in terms of Zoso and probably you're right, my first actual presence experience. There's some songs we'll get to during the track by track breakdown that I'll sort of allude to, but I distinctly remember, and for listeners, Mike and I, amongst a lot of our friends, graduated high school 2005.
Yeah.
And a very dear friend of ours who now lives down in Austin, Texas, Nathaniel Renstein, otherwise known as Nate. Or
his middle name is actually Ren.
Ren, yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
But it's W-R-E-N, so it's not like Ren and Stimpy. It's Ren,
right.
W-R-E-N, yeah.
Right. He was a freshman at Michigan State in 2005. So every so often we would get the Bluebird effect where Nate would swoop back into Champaign for a long weekend, a holiday, things of that nature. And this specific Zoso show that was at the Canopy was when Mike and I were taking a stab at our first out-of-house living experience on Springfield Avenue in a great apartment. I loved that apartment. To this day, I love that apartment. Nothing extraordinary. It had a balcony that looked out over Springfield, but it was 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, 1 tiny little kitchen, man, but it was like our own little slice of summer heaven. We sublet it just for the summer. So you'd have students that would go back north and they would sublet their apartment out for like $600. And Mike and I are like, this is great. No brainer, right? It's like a hotel for 3 months of the year.
Yeah, and it was especially nice. I mean, the location was good. It had the balcony. It was summer. And it was, I lived in the dorms freshman year, but that doesn't feel like adulthood yet. That's still kind of summer camp.
Yeah.
But when you sublet an apartment, all of a sudden it's real. I remember actually getting there the first day because I had all these points left on my dorm food card. And I took a big black garbage bag. And I just loaded that sucker up with probably 60 bottles of Diet Coke. We had that fridge. It was probably stocked for all of like 3 weeks, and then those were gone. But yeah, we made good use of that apartment.
We did. And I distinctly remember the night of Zoso, just like almost any show, Mike, it was you that was the stronghold influence for many things back then, right? Going up to Soldier Field to see
Stones later that fall.
Yeah, the Rolling Stones I wouldn't have just done on my own. Most of the Dave Matthews shows during that time frame I would not have leapt for unless you were like, hey, I'm going this weekend. Do you want to go? Same went for a lot of local shows. You were like, hey, there's this band playing the Canopy Club. Do you guys want to go check them out? Nate was obviously inquiring what we were up to that night. I believe it was more of a brisk evening, if I'm not mistaken.
I might have worn my blazer.
Yeah, we had jackets on, and I don't know why I remember that so distinctly. It's mostly because of what Nate's jacket was, like this distinct green jacket. I was always get a bear hug in, but nonetheless, man, we like took on the town, pre-gamed a little bit at my apartment, and we went to Zoso. Lindsay was there.
Matt? I'm sure Matt and Kenton. Well, Kenton was probably too young, but I recall too that Canopy had these Long Island iced teas.
Yep.
That were super potent.
Yeah.
So maybe midway through the show, things start kind of, browning out a little bit.
It's not a short walk by any means out to Cranert / Canopy Club area from where we lived. It wasn't a massive hike, but it was longer than what we would have been just simply used to going to 6th Street or anything like that. So
you can take a rickshaw.
Yeah.
Even if you tried.
Yeah, we'll get to that story too. I want to hear all of what that entails. But nonetheless, I'll be swift here. So we went to the show. We had a great time, and it was just one of those nights where like you were into it, and they bring it. Zoso brings it, but also it was just the element of like I don't know if you've ever seen the movie like 200 Cigarettes or like anything like that. It just seemed like we were
actually.
It just seemed we were like out on the town, dude. And it's that pocket of time as adolescents, but young adults, where like you have a little bit of leash to be like, man, if we got into a little bit of trouble tonight, our parents would probably understand. And like also you didn't want to at the same time. So there was just like this like coming of age, constant aura that was around these kind of weekends. And that was one of those lost nights where I don't think any of us were like, man, maybe you were super jacked to go see Zoso. We were just ready to be like belly up to a bar, go see some live music and be together. And show was great. We kind of left. And then the cool thing about a band like Zoso is they got off stage, they literally went right to the bar. And we're sitting there at the bar and we're like, right next to quote unquote John Bonham. And
we're calling them by these names because what else are you going to call them?
We're very well buzzed at this point. So we're just they're still in their facade, and we're sort of just talking to them whether they were or not. We were acting like they were. So we leave and we're on our walk back home, and Nate had a bottle of beer that we were sort of passing around to pass the time until we got back to our apartment to continue on the party. And there's like these townhome apartments, kind of a front-facing facade where you can see all the front doors. And it's like that scene from Dazed and Confused where, beer bottle gets tossed up and all the kids like take off running before it crashes down, end scene. Well, we kind of finish the bottle. I hand it back to Nate and he sort of just gives it like a swift, toss with his right hand. And it just perfectly skips off of the concrete of the street. So it did not shatter as intended, and takes a swift bounce, a speedy bounce, into the front door of one of those apartments and just explodes. At which point we're well on our way at this point of running as soon as that thing skipped. Got back to our apartment, and you're kind of, holy shit, man, that was fucking intense.
We're underage. We're all underage.
Either it was an empty apartment completely, there was some stoned college kids sitting there, had no idea what was going on, and by the time they opened up their door, they were wondering what had happened.
Yeah,
and
they didn't care.
We're over embellishing as well the whole thing of how that just went down, and then we kind of continued on our night. But yeah, that was Zoso always coming into town. After that was like, we got to go see these guys just because they do put it on. I mean, they really do put on a great show.
There was a reliability to them, and the fact that they would bust out an Achilles Last Stand and actually nail it. And it's funny to me, Ben, because this album that we're about to talk about here, Presence, is not by hardly anybody considered Zeppelin's best. But I do think time has been very kind to it. And I think in a way it is an anomaly in their discography because it's not very sonically diverse. It's just electric guitars. But if you just want a rock album and you want guitars and you want riffs and you want really very little embellishment, I know there's overdubs in Achilles Last Stand. It's just more electric guitars. There's not a whole lot in the way of like extra production. It's raw in a way that they hadn't probably done since the first album. But even that, Jimmy was like, here's an acoustic song. And here's a couple of blues songs. This was just rock, except the blues closer. And we'll talk about all 7 of these tracks. But I liked it from an early age, but I think its reputation as not being a classic has kept me at arm's length from it. I didn't consume it as much as the other ones. I know you certainly haven't. So it was kind of fun doing this week and being able to come in a little bit fresher to an album and not bring in so much baggage or personal memories attached to it.
Agreed. There are also a few tracks on here that are surprisingly relevant for me through my Zeppelin hood, if you will, which we'll get to in both my rankings and track by track discussions that I'm excited about, just because as you're maneuvering this album, blindly, if you put a gun to my head and said, Ben, what's the song on Presence? I wouldn't have been able to just haphazardly answer at any point in time up until we've been going through the catalog. So the other thing I did that is a bit taboo from the other albums is I actually did take time to take a deeper dive into initial reactions to this album and then also ongoing reactions to fans. And it's funny, man. I've found literally no middle ground. People either absolutely love this thing and rave about it, top to bottom, or it's dog shit. And it's no worthy part of the Zeppelin catalog. That's taken from a couple websites I was on and then obviously Reddit in terms of, just looking into what people were thinking and things like that. And there's some filler tracks that they talk about, but there's also songs on this album that some argue are the best. And I'm just like, wow, and there's also a rumored, internet sensation that people just say Presence is great just for the sole fact of.
Well, you know what it is?
Great,
it's like fans of, God, what would be an example of this? A band that both you and I like. I don't know. It'd be like a Dave fan saying Away from the World is sneaky their best album. And you're like, listen, it's okay, but I mean, is it really?
Hey, two questions. Number one, when did you start listening to the band? Does it so happen to, consequate with the exact date that this damn thing came out? So your first experience was like a new listen, and then you became a fan, and then you were backtracking in their catalog.
Sure.
So it's kind of a fair argument in some respect because, again, albums and movies are all about how it resonates with you. But then again, if you go back album by album with them, it would be tough to put it up there. But it's fun. It's a blink, man. I mean, it is really a blink. It's one of those albums where I know you listen to Apple Music, which I did for years, but I'm on Spotify. And when an album ends, even if you're on the artist page and you go specifically to an album, if an album ends, it doesn't take you to the next artist album. It'll just kind of shoot you off into oblivion. So like next thing you know, I'm listening to a obscure Police song, and I was like, 2 seconds, I'm like mowing the lawn, and I'm like, this can't be on Presence. As a matter of fact, this isn't even Zeppelin. What the fuck's going on right now? And like, stop mowing, grab my phone. I'm like, oh, it's just shot me into some other artist right now because the album ended so quickly. And I was like a sniff into my yard. I was like, I need to take more time with this. This is a quick album. But it's sneaky as well because you just get lost in it. And then next thing you know, the 7 tracks are over. So
yeah, I think there's a hypnotic quality to it. I've used that word a lot with Zeppelin, but I think there's a lot of repetition in all of these songs. So that hypnotic thing really rears its head in this one. I do have an association with this that I consider quite positive. So I was in 6th grade, and I had a girlfriend. And I'm going to ask you this in a second because when you had middle or high school girlfriends and your birthday came up, they'd say, well, what do you want for your birthday? And of course, the kosher thing to do would be like, oh, I mean, come on, I'm good. That's so nice of you, but I don't really need anything. But for some reason, the timing of this in 6th grade coincided with the fact that there was one studio album of Zeppelin's I did not have, and that was Presence. So she asked, and I just simply said, oh, well, yeah, if you go to Best Buy or Circuit City and you happen to see Led Zeppelin's album Presence, that'd be a great present. So she was like, okay. And it's funny because word got back to me that one of her friends told her that it was quite selfish of me to respond with such a specific gift. I'll take Led Zeppelin Presence. Yeah, go to Best Buy or Circuit City, see if you can find it. Sure enough, she got it for me. So the thing with Presence is that it's not like 105.9 WGKC was playing Achilles Last Stand too long. It's not like they were playing Nobody's Fault But Mine. I didn't have any experience with this album despite loving the first 6 and knowing In Through the Outdoor because of Fool in the Rain.
Right.
And I distinctly remember going up to my dad's dad, so that grandpa, Poppy, as we called him, in Paxton with my Discman, my Mega Bass Discman. And as they were watching, baseball or whatever out in the main room, I'd have my headphones on, listening to Presence, introducing myself to something basically brand new to my ears, and really liking it, and really specifically liking about 3 or 4 songs, which are reflected in the rankings at the end of this. And it's funny, I went back to the first 20 seconds of T for One, and I would play that riff over and over and over. And to this day, dude, I haven't gotten over that riff. I think it's just one of the coolest little things Zeppelin ever put on record. And you talk often about, no, make that longer. don't end it. And then they just take it away from you just as you're really, really getting into it. But yeah, that is one thing I associate with this album. Getting it for my 6th grade birthday from my girlfriend. We're talking like, listen, what's a 6th grade girlfriend? You pass notes, you talk on the phone awkwardly. I don't know if we so much as held hands, but I did get Led Zeppelin presents from her. So Christina Walker, thank you so much.
There you go. Yeah, like unlike Out on the Tiles, it is a blip of a riff and then it's gone for the rest of the time. You don't even get like 2 quick minutes of it, which I would take all day. So I agree. It might be the actual definition in the encyclopedia of a song that gives you just a smidge and then it's gone, and it's never comes back. 2 things I want to address though. One, you said the hypnotic factor, and I'll kind of paint my picture on how that happens. I specifically listened to this yet a 3rd time today, top to bottom, and I said to myself, I need to take some time to listen to XYZ. I want to give these things away for obvious purposes here going into the track by track breakdown in our rankings. But nonetheless, I was telling myself the only reason I'm doing this right now is to pick these things out, and I fucking got wrapped up, dude.
Yep.
Like, it's impossible not to get hypnotized by these fuckers like a flute playing King Cobra dude, man. I was like, and then you get to the end and it was almost like frustrating every single time because I'm like, fuck, I didn't do what I intended to do because I just got caught up in it again.
Yeah, you're right, though. There is, on one hand, an immediacy about this album, and then on the other hand, it's kind of impenetrable. I wish I could explain how those 2 things even coexist. But to this day, I still put it on. I was going out and doing some shopping today, and on my way out, I'd be able to get a track in and then go to the next place, get another track or 2 then. And yeah, it hit me that there's still things I hear on these tracks that after all these years I haven't picked up. These new little earworms and things that are really cool. So yeah, I think that's an interesting dichotomy. It's both immediate because it's just guitar-based drums, and it's also impenetrable because, I mean, T for One's a great example of that. It's this. I never get bored in its 9 minutes, and yet if you said, okay, tell me what happens between minutes 3 and 5, I'm like, I don't remember.
Yeah.
I guess I have to go back and listen to it again.
There's also a few tracks on here, if not many, go on a limb and say many, that don't. There's no way to come off on this because somebody's going to love a number of these tracks, and this is going to be the most disrespectful statement, but some tracks on here, unlike their earlier stuff where it actually will deliver some kind of gut punch throughout, this has you sort of lingering, waiting for a certain delivery, if you will.
A lack of a climax in some of these.
That climax delivery does not end up coming, and I almost, man, I'm going to say this, I almost enjoy this album for that sole reason. As opposed to there being track after track with like some crazy euphoric delivery, like some tracks that have preceded it. So I'm looking forward to this, man. I'm looking forward to the track by track breakdown and the rankings. I do want to give a quick shout out because you and I were now obviously about as polar opposite in middle school as humanly possible, because my 7th grade girlfriend, not 6th, by 7th grade, I'd moved on from my 6th grade girlfriend. But shout out to Tara Harris. She also got me an album along with a gold FUBU necklace.
God dang.
Yeah, so I got this blinged out gold rope necklace with a big FUBU charm on it.
What was the album?
Yeah, a box in my locker, and also the Cisco CD.
It was fit.
Man, dude, the Cisco CD was a banger back then too. So that was kind of a big present. I didn't specifically say, hey, I want a FUBU chain and a Cisco CD, but nonetheless, I got them. And,
Enter the Dragon or Unleash the Dragon?
Unleash the Dragon. Enter the Dragon would have been the Bruce Lee
There you
movie. But yeah, man.
Thong Song, of course. But there was another hit, right?
Oh, there was many on that that specific album, man.
Just imagine we were 12, 13 years old at school dances, singing every word to the Thong Song.
Yeah.
And no one batted an eye.
Yeah.
What a world.
Oh, we could have our own podcast on that subject alone, man.
God damn.
The 80s, 90s tracks versus today's.
Well, dude, it's like when I'm at the football games, they're playing Superman That Hoe. And I mean, I think I know what it means to do that. I mean, it's pretty vulgar, isn't it? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they played that, and there's just, moms and they're like 5, 6-year-old kids eating popcorn, just like kind of bopping around to it. I'm like, do you guys understand what it means to Superman that hoe? Just saying. Okay, so FUBU, though, the FUBU necklace.
Yeah, it was a big one, man. I mean, that's
Did you
very
have any other FUBU apparel?
Oh yeah, man. I had a FUBU puff jacket that was
Dang.
reversible. One side it was like banana yellow. The other side it was like a kind of a real shiny, shimmery navy blue, and I had a matching yellow FUBU stocking cap. So if I had it on the
Oh
yellow
my
side of the
God.
jacket and the yellow stocking cap, just to literally stay warm, I'm walking into seventh grade winters like constantly in Champaign, obviously, looking like a massive puffy banana.
You look
Man,
like Malibu's Most Wanted.
I thought it was the coolest fucking shit ever, though. Especially the fact that I was also simultaneously wearing. They weren't Uggs; they were called Lugs, so they were also a big shoe statement back then. And
Was
they
that
were like,
off? No, was that a thing, or was that like off-brand Uggs?
wasn't off-brand Uggs. Uggs wasn't even. It
Oh,
was
they weren't around, yeah.
LEGZ. No, it was more of its own brand, kind of at the same time as like Jinko jeans and stuff. But this was like a tan leather, like work boot looking thing. Um, obviously you always kind of you always got decked out like before or at Christmas with all the stuff that you really wanted, and then you went back to school and you repped it or whatever the statement was back then, man. But I would come back, with whatever the in fashion was back then. I tried to like kind of emulate, and man,
You were much more fashionable. Like you were much more adventurous in your fashion. I was much more Tommy Hilfiger,
I had a
Levi's.
lot of Tommy. You know what I'm happy about, man? A lot of people speak to this, but and I'm sure the guys at Zeppelin would agree that they were photographed as, rock icons. They still were nowhere near as paparazzied or photographed or immortalized in terms of what people have had of them then, which versus what would have today if they were just as famous. Which point to that statement is that right now as parents, we have an iPhone on us at all times. There is very few days where we go a stretch that I don't have at least one photograph of my child or children, Collins and Brooks, or friends. Man, we go to a bachelor party weekend or we go back for homecoming. It's just an onslaught of constant photographing and videos and this, that, and the other. So I'm very thankful that despite having, the threads that I was looking forward to back then, that there is not a
Documentation.
documentation of
All
it.
of that shit.
Some of me sometimes selfishly is like, man, I would love to go through and just be able to cackle, laugh, and look back at these ridiculous times. The other
Maybe.
half is like, I'm glad it exists in the memory bank.
Thank you. And if I were to get one thing from back then, it'd be pictures of my childhood dog. That's
Yeah.
it. Other than that, just let it be a memory that is elusive on one hand and a little bit fuzzy, but that's how memory should be.
I was always jealous. I mean, Matt McCowan, Kenton, they grew up in a household that had, camcorders back then and would film holidays and stuff like that. And it was always like, oftentimes we would get to a sleepover and we'd just start throwing on family videos and cracking up and having a great time. And I was like, ours is documented, but more in photograph form. I mean, hell, dude, as kids, we had one for sure photo a year, and that was our school photos,
Yeah.
right? Aside from that, it was up to your parents and family. Did you do a family photo shoot?
Did you go to
Did you have
Sears? Did you go to
vacation photo shoots? You definitely maybe you had we had a Polaroid that was pretty sweet, but man,
so
we didn't like constantly just take relentless pictures of everything.
I kind of like it that way. Karen,
Yeah.
my wife and I just had a conversation about that tonight. Just the mystery too. It fed into Zeppelin. We were lucky enough to be on the tail or before the advent of smartphones, so we still have a childhood that is kind of its own in its own lockbox, and I kind of prefer it that way. These kids today, everything is immortal. It's
Yeah.
immortalized. It's always there. That to me would be really daunting. I wouldn't like that.
You got to wonder too, and I'll leave on this. This is a completely wormhole question that I don't look for a response on. I just am sort of thought provoking in terms of riffing as we are right now before we actually get going. Luckily, listeners, we do have timestamps on all our shit, so you can blaze past all this if you'd like. Nonetheless, my thought is garage bands that formulated like Zeppelin, where it was a trio of folks that were found, despite obviously Jimmy Page being the fourth, but formulated kind of purposely, or just folks that grew up together and got put in a band. I always wondered to myself, would a band like Zeppelin if they were born today, have been as big just because of the way that folks' brains work and
No.
social media and photography and everything. It's like, a lot of their tenure and the ability to stick, I think, came from the fact that people were so hungry for pop culture, but they didn't get it thrown down their throats constantly every single day, where they could pick something up, enjoy it, and throw it away like a dirty habit the very next day because something else came along. You had to put your own time into it, just like all these bands did, where, bootstrapping, playing in their parents' attic or a garage, doing one thing after the next, playing school dances, playing clubs, playing bars, playing stadiums. Nowadays it's just such a shot in the dark. You're either nostalgic and you can continue to tour because people will pay to come see you because they remember you, or you've blown up into outer space because you know how to infiltrate social media and
Zeppelin
so
would not have played that game.
No,
They
exactly.
would not. And they didn't for the equivalent back then, which was just regular media. All right, we are 6 episodes in. This is episode number 7. Welcome to Drop the Needleheads. I'm Schmiggy, Mike Carpenter, and that's Yahtzee.
That's me.
Ben Yates. Full birth name. And let me get the script up here, Ben. I really should be doing better when it comes to this sort of stuff. Here we go. Drop the Needleheads with Schmiggy and Yahtzee, where the records spin, the bourbon flows, and for 2 more episodes. The breakdowns will be deeper than John Bonham's bass drum. Quick programming note, we decided to make an audible here. We are not going to do a separate Coda episode, only because, one, and I think even diehard Zeppelin fans would admit, it's odds and sods collection that I don't know if it's worth doing a whole episode for. So what we're going to do next week is In Through the Outdoor, and at the end of our Spiciest Biscuit categories, we will award some Spiciest Biscuits for Zeppelin's catalog as a whole, and we'll determine what those categories are before next week. But we're going to wrap that up, and we're really excited to get on to artist number 2 from a completely different era, same country, completely different era, with a little bit of relevance now as we go into the summer of 2025. So, Ben, if I may, I'd like to take you back to the summer of 1976. I think it's actually kind of apt that we're doing this on the week of the 4th of July, because summer of 76, I think of Days Confused, as you mentioned, which takes place going into the summer of 76. America's Bicentennial. It is a year that was, I talk about physical graffiti in 75, that being the quintessential 70s year. Maybe 76 was for the American experience in the 70s. And Zeppelin, despite being a British band, was as close to an American band as a British band could be, because America accepted them first. They made them as big as they were, even more so than the European fans. And this album still played well for, I think, American audiences, though they did not tour anywhere, including America in 1976. This year, Ben, was only about recording. One thing I want to ask you before I get into the background of this record: how much knowledge do you have of the lead up to the recording process, the writing recording process of this album?
None. I
Okay.
did very little research in terms of the back end of this on purpose. I think that, I was looking forward to hearing from you some things that may or may not sway what I've already taken note of here. I think we have the artistic ability to potentially make some changes before our full ruling on ranking comes out, but I do feel pretty concrete and certain going into this. I did some back end research, as I told you, on sort of the reception of how this album was handled, just because it sparked my interest as soon as I got done listening to say, I think I know how I feel about this.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to see if others felt the same way or they didn't, or if I'm just completely out there in la la land. But no, I did very little back end research. I did my part, which we changed last week as well, which is what happened on release day, 1976. So I'll be looking forward to doing what I do and divulging some interesting information there. Have some awesome stories as well that go hand in hand with that. But in terms of recording process and the lead up, man, it's all yours, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
All right, so it's the summer of 1975 that we're going to start with, not 1976 when this came out, but the summer of 75, Zeppelin was taking a break between tours. They had a very successful run at Earl's Court, in London, which is a 5-night stand, which you find on the Led Zeppelin DVD. This is them at the peak of their powers. I mean, they're the biggest band in the world. They come to America. They have a big successful tour in the spring. Then they go on vacation, as they're warranted, because they'd had an extremely busy first 6 years. So Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, and their families were vacationing in Greece. specifically the Greek island of Rhodes. On August 4th, 1975, Marine Plant is driving a car with Robert and their 2 kids, Carmen and Carrick, daughter and a son. It skids off the road directly into a tree. So, Marine Plant is unconscious. She's bleeding badly. Robert thinks that she's dead. He has a broken right ankle. He has broken bones in his right leg. He has a broken elbow, fractures all over his body. They wait 2 hours before a local farmer drives by with a flatbed truck. She's bleeding out. He can't really move or do anything. The kids are crying in the back seat. The car behind them had her sister, so his sister-in-law, which that's a whole other thing, and their family. So they get taken into town in Rhodes. Now, this is an old Greek isle. This is not really technologically advanced. They get into this crappy hospital with cockroaches and rats, and fortunately, Robert Plant's wife's sister had the same blood type as she did. She had a very rare blood type. Gets a transfusion. It keeps her alive. They spend 48 hours in this hospital. Authorities won't let them leave Greece because they're investigating the crash to see if there's any foul play, drugs, whatever. Zeppelin tour manager Richard Cole has to make plans to get them out. Otherwise, Marine Plant is probably going to die in Greece. So he comes up with this nighttime escape with a helicopter. He comes out of the helicopter. He's wheeling Robert, and then one of the Zeppelin goons is wheeling Marine Plant. They are getting them into a helicopter to get to England. They arrive in England, but due to their tax exile status, their record company says, fly around for another 30 minutes. If you land before midnight, you will owe thousands of dollars in extra taxes. So they just circle around, something that Richard Cole regrets to this day. He said, we probably should have just landed the plane. It was pretty stupid of us. They finally do. Everyone survives. But the injuries for Robert are serious. I mean, they can't go on tour. They cancel a huge U.S. tour that was going to open up with 2 shows at a stadium in Oakland to 90,000 fans. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. They lost millions of dollars because of this. 6 weeks he spends at home in a wheelchair. He's drinking beer. He's taking painkillers. Plant is at his surliest. Understandable, right? So in September, him and Jimmy meet in Malibu, California. They can't tour, but he wants to get out of the house. He has to for tax exile status. He can't stay in England. He cannot stay with his family or they will be docked. The Stones had this all the time, man. Exile on Main Street was all because they had to leave England or face crazy taxes, which happened to the rich in that country. So they meet in Malibu in September 1975. They come up with an album's worth of material, and 1 month later, in October of 75, John Bonham and JPJ joined them at Hollywood's SIR Studios. November of 1975, they moved to Munich. Again, they can't go home. Musicland Studios in Munich is chosen because of its, quote, state-of-the-art facilities. Robert's in a wheelchair singing these songs. Jimmy Page and engineer Keith Harwood worked 18 to 20-hour days. Jimmy was really dabbling with heroin, but credit to him, he got it done, and it took them 18 total days to record this entire thing. 2 days were borrowed from the aforementioned Rolling Stones, who were about to enter the studio to record what became their album, Black and Blue. Not a very good album. Presence is far better. Now, through all this, Ben, resentment grew in Robert Plant towards Jimmy and manager Peter Grant. The studio was in a basement. It was claustrophobic. It took him away from his family, and they didn't really show much regard about his health or his family's health, or it made him begin to shift his priorities, and it led into what was a very toxic 1977 tour, which ended in Oakland, California. And a day later, he finds out that his son, Carrick, who I think was 6 or 7 years old, died of a mysterious stomach ailment. The end of Zeppelin began with Presence, Ben. There was still some light amongst all the darkness, but we could listen to this album, especially lyrically, and see that Robert was using this for some catharsis. He was pissed off about a lot, and I think a lot of it justifiable.
Yeah. Wow. Holy crap.
You had no idea about that stuff.
After you started to go through some of the anecdotes, the 18 days recording, borrowed from the Stones, some of the story about them being unable to get home and stuff like that. I'd seen over the years. I never really pinpointed it to a singular album or anything like that. A lot of that was discussed in some YouTube like personal docu series and things that people put together in terms of what they believe was nearing the end. So it's interesting to hear that in terms of going to this album. The thing that is interesting to me that parallels perfectly with how you teed things up is that there are tracks on this album that I did look into in terms of the background and the lore that goes hand in hand with a lot of the lyrical content on certain songs, and realize that there are some aspects of this album that would put some of the Biggie, Tupac, East Coast, West Coast beef to shame in terms of blatantly stating things as they were back then.
About his own bandmates.
Yeah. So,
well, specifically Jimmy, let's be real.
Yeah, it'll be nice to hear some of the what do the kids call it? Tea that you've got?
Yes, he is going to spill the tea in the lyrics on this album. There's no doubt.
Just perfect. So
now, this album does not come out until March of '76. The year of 1976 was weird for Zeppelin. Studio album comes out in March. I guess that's not too big of a turnaround time. They recorded it in November '75. Later that year, because they couldn't tour still, because Robert was still recovering. I mean, this is a year it takes him to basically rehab from this thing. So they released The Song Remains the Same, the live album and movie, which doesn't quite capture their best performance, and it got pretty bad reviews. 76 was a weird year for Zeppelin, and I think I remember in Richard Cole's book, he wrote a tell-all about their life, and it's just as obscene as you would expect it to be, but I think he called 76 the year that didn't happen. Yes, they released an album. They released a live album, but it was a holding pattern until they could get back on the road. So this album has that. Do you gather that sense of movement on this album, like a restlessness within the band? Because I can sense it in some of these tracks.
Yeah, I'm taking a moment to kind of fully process that, because as I said, there's some tracks on here. I think I took this at face value, just as I would any other Zeppelin album, top to bottom, kind of what appealed to me the most. But knowing the back end story and sort of the way that some of these tracks present themselves definitely give some angst to the way that they're put together and the formulation of the music itself. So yeah, it's always crazy, man. I think that's such an important piece. It always makes you think different about bands too. Like if you watch a documentary of any kind, PJ20, the Eagles documentary, any Stones documentary that exists, even the Zeppelin doc, it's like you just look at things through a different angle most times that help formulate the product itself. Because most times the only thing that you've listened to, as they say, is the tip of the iceberg. Like there's so much underneath the surface that you don't even get a sense of. And this one is one of those albums for sure, man. Because again, like I said, I've looked up some of the deep end stuff on, even Royal Orleans. There's undertones to the entire thing. So
I just had this thought, and tell me if this works. Is if Presence were a concept album, I know it's not, but to me, it could be considered one a bit as a band on the road and all the things that go with it. So Achilles' Last Stand is this triumphant, magisterial march into the opening of a tour. We're Led Zeppelin. We're going to conquer it. Achilles' Last Stand. We're coming for you. We got purpose. So it's this epic start, right? And then you get right into For Your Life, which is specifically about California and L.A. and cocaine and just how seedy it had gotten. So, I just imagine that Robert is writing from one song to the next. It's like a travelogue of all these different places. He's in California for Your Life. He's in New Orleans for Royal Orleans. Nobody's Fault But Mine could be at any random stop in the Midwest or something where all the demons are really catching up with him in the band. Candy Store Rock, which is probably the lightest lyrical track on the album, is maybe when they're in Memphis or something and they feel like they're getting back to their roots. Okay, we're a rock band. Everybody just chill out. And then Hot's On For Nowhere, something pisses him off again. He's pissed off at Jim. He's pissed off at the manager. And finally, T for One, it's at the end of the tour. He's in his hotel room, and he has this moment of realization that all this excitement and all this adrenaline that pumps through a tour, it doesn't mean shit. He's alone. He's bored. The party's over. So to me, I think lyrically, it's one of Robert's best albums. It's his most autobiographical album. And I just, by the end of it, I empathize with him. Despite the millions of dollars he has and the rock god status, you feel more for Robert as a human being through his lyrics than I think any album that's come before, because I always felt like he was keeping the listener a bit at arm's length. Maybe he was a 10 years gone on physical graffiti that finally started letting people in. And then by this album, he's like, all right, I'm going to spill it. Here's what I think.
No, 100%. And, it's funny. 18 days to record the album. Almost an impossibility, Mike. And again, something that might perturb some listeners just solely because they'll have their favorite and they're going to bash my statement here. But this is one of those albums that was extremely tough to pull out a specific killer line just because it's also literal. And it's like there was nothing that was, me, I gravitate towards like some otherworldly lyrics and things that really get you thinking. And
these are all, you're right. There's not a lot of abstraction here.
No, there really isn't. It's all kind of just words that are pretty definite. And I've got one. I'm looking forward to unleashing it. But like,
Me too.
Pretty tough, man. It was like, so now that you mention this, now that I see the recording time and then also just the essence of the tour that Robert lyrically takes you on, he sort of put his foot down and was like, I'm going to put lyrics down and, this is what they'll be kind of deal. And you also get a sense looking back in hindsight, like if he would have described maybe what some of these lyrics meant, that there would have been pushback, obvious pushback from the person in most cases he was talking about. So
yeah, and to me, doesn't it seem to you that as this band continues, that Robert Plant's stature within it grows, and that by the end of it, he's basically on equal footing with Jimmy?
Yes.
And I'll say this I'll add this addendum.
Yeah.
Relative to where they started, no doubt. But I think you could even make the argument that by the end of it, Robert was as important and as essential as Jimmy was, because he'd become every bit the songwriter. He kept his head about him in a way that Jimmy didn't. I mean, Robert, through all these years, yes, he partied. He had loads of sex. He lived the rock and roll lifestyle, but he had a maturity about him despite his youth where he never was on the verge of death, for sure. And, he just seemed to kind of just have a hold on things a little bit better.
Yeah, no, this is sort of another rabbit hole that it's hard to articulate, so I'm going to try my best here and not, drowned in a ton of filler words. But he was brought in as a hunch from Jimmy, and I think that element was sort of plainly put in some of the first albums. Not that he didn't perform. Like, clearly he did not perform. He was the right guy for the job, and that was never in question. It was more that his chops, so to speak, were, in terms of the whole picture, were coming about the entire time. Sure. He solely then became the guy. I think now if you talk to almost any artist, and doesn't matter who they were, Bruce Springsteen, anybody else, Robert Plant is going to get brought up in conversation. He was a chaser. It was a person that you could never touch, right? He was the Michael Jordan of rock vocalists. It was like, hey, who do you want your perfect specimen to be as your front man? The dude wore like 2 buttons at the bottom, if any, of his shirt. And he had this long flowing hair and a voice to match that almost seemed fake, right? Like it couldn't possibly be real. He's not hitting some of these notes, this, that, and the other. Mm-hmm. In a time where people were playing with funky recording, technique and things like that. But man, he delivered, and then he would replicate it times 1,000 live. And he would hold the audiences in their palm, and in his palm. And so I think by this point he realizes, like, hey guys, this is all of our dreams. It has been all of our dreams, but clearly I do now have a position where, it also has to be a confidence thing, man. Like if you know that you're going to leave something and that's the end of that something, that has to be pretty powerful. There was a time before this where I'm going to go ahead and say, like, man, if he would have left pre-physical graffiti, or there was this much riff pre-physical graffiti, that there's a chance the band may have tried to push on past where they ended up pushing onto, and that's a whole other element. I think it was, timing is everything. But to be sensing that, especially coming off such a tragic and probably mind-boggling and life-numbing experience where you realize the important things in life, and then to tail end it with where they ended up after the tour and his son, you painted that picture for me, and I can only imagine what priorities would be in my head, and I guarantee you it wouldn't be anything to do with work or friends or anything that weren't, top of the list back then. And this is something that made them, but also at the end of the day, these are human beings, man. And like you said, he's made millions of dollars. He's lived a life that most anybody would sign on the dotted line for at any given moment, but they're still human at the end of the day, and deal with emotions, and also just the length and exhaustion of what they actually do to put an album like this together in 18 days, and how they put the first album together in less. It just sort of is like, you ask yourself how, but also that's the level these guys went to, and that's the time and effort they put in. So nothing surprises me.
No, one more thing to add to that is before we get in the tracks, the rift would get deeper because after his son died, John Bonham was the only band member to attend the funeral. Now, there's speculation that Jimmy and John Paul thought that it was best to keep distance so it wasn't a media circus. I think that's the most generous thing that one could say, but regardless, that essentially, Carrick Plant's death ended Zeppelin as we know it. I know they had another album. I know they were going to do another tour, but the party was over, right? And that, I think, led to a rift that I think Robert eventually said, that's it. Of course, they got over it. I mean, they are fond enough of each other to recognize what they did for one another, but I think any idea that they were going to be super close friends after the band was over, that ended right there. It's not, you say that, it does not reflect well.
No, but also assumptions are everything, right? And a lot of this, you wonder how far this has gone and how twisted things became even back then. I mean, our generation put together one of the end-all be-all greatest rumors of all time in Marilyn Manson and his missing
rib.
So you never know how far things have gone through the telephone, and obviously they are fine today. But at the same time, at face value, if you think about that impact, and you know how I am, like I'm relationship first all day, every day, admittedly enough, wear my heart on my sleeve. It's over finances, it's over everything else. It's like, if I've got friends and family around me, what else do you really need at the end of the day? But if that is true, and
it is true, the speculation as to why is what's
why. Right. No, that's what I'm getting at. They weren't there, but why? Yeah. And on one half, you think, okay, well, is it our place? And what is he going through? At the other time, you always show up. It doesn't matter. And man, does that make you think just a little bit about, the guys that you emulate and you look up to, because up to that story, it's kind of like they're just guys in a rock band together. They're clearly family. But you sort of realize there's a line at every so often amongst people. It's just surprising to hear in this case. So
yeah, and there's some of those lyrics that kind of foreshadow that on this album. Let's launch into it, shall we?
Right, man. Wow, what a precursor to 7 tracks right now. That's Achilles maybe the most intense we've got, and I mean it's. Yeah. I guess I wasn't anticipating that, but this is just this is going to be pretty intense now, all things considered. So yeah, let's roll.
Achilles Last Stand. So this is the opening track. It's the second longest track in Zeppelin's discography after, what's the longest one, Ben? We talked about last week.
No, why do you got to do this to me, man?
It was my Spiciest Biscuit from Physical Graffiti.
I'm having a massive mental.
No, it's fine. In My Time of Dying is number one. Yes, that's the longest. The second longest in their discography is Achilles Last Stand, and what a hell of an opener. And you talked about showing this to Emily, and that maybe a couple minutes in she'd be like looking at her phone, and I get that, because even as a Zeppelin fan, it wasn't immediate, but over time you get to grow. You grow an appreciation for the performance and the arrangement of it. The fact that they didn't just this could have turned to a train wreck so easily. And then when you really get into like the fourth or fifth listen, that hypnotic quality that we talked about really kind of rears its head. So a lot of things to talk about with this song. We've talked about Robert a lot. I want to focus on Jimmy for a second here because I think that guitar-wise, this is one of his best works. And the way that they're layered on top of one another, a solo that he deems as good as Stairway, I'm not sure about that, but it is pretty good. And to me, this is as close to a mission statement song as a band could have given these circumstances. We're sidelined. All we can do is play music. So here is the urgency that we're feeling. It sounds like a band about to, their bones are about to jump out of their skin. That's one thing I really love about the song, the urgency that I talked about.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's you sort of. Obviously, I'm sort of gobsmacked right now and taken it back. All credibility is gone from any of our listeners, as I couldn't.
Oh, stop! Don't worry. Don't.
I do want to admit I'd taken a huge drink of my ranch water tequila here, and also was just kind of doing a quick look at the opening lyrics of this song. Man, like I took all of this in a completely different reaction listening to this album, and so it was not anywhere near as drastic or deep as what I imagined they were going through before recording this thing. So I felt the urgency in Achilles Last Stand, but I also just had this thought even tonight, as I was putting the kids down for bed and getting ready for the podcast, is that lo and behold, they kick an album off with yet another banger, And like, I think that's true. It doesn't matter what the concept was behind the lyrics or how they delivered, but yet another album that's just starts off rip-roaring. And, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, for the majority of our listeners, their Spicy Biscuit on this album is probably Achilles Last Stand.
And it would be a great selection. Yeah.
So saying that, I think that my first experience, whether it was Zoso or not, and hearing this, it was just jam-packed with energy from start to finish. And even in Robert's lyrics, like, the way he opens it up, it's a different sense of the space that he usually gives. He's rattling it off, and it's like they're all kind of scurrying for something. But it works, man, and it's it's no pun intended, rock solid from start to finish for the opening track of a 3-track side of an album. That's just the other thing. Like,
yeah, it's one
I'd like
that
to back up one real quick and say, hey,
yeah,
your 6th grade girlfriend didn't get you this CD. Like your parents got you the hard press album, and you go sit down and you flip it over to check the track list, and you see there's 3 tracks on side one.
Dude, when I knew that before she bought it for me. I knew the track list and all that. I thought, how is this a 7-track album? Yeah. It makes more sense in context, of course, listening to it, because Achilles Last Stand is the equivalent of 3 really awesome songs smashed into one 10-minute journey. But yeah, it would have been shocking.
Coming off of Physical Graffiti too, and then
15.
What they went through between records, right? Hindsight's 2020. It all makes sense. They had to put something together. They did it, but you wonder, coming off Physical Graffiti, if you dropped the band that came off Physical Graffiti, that toured post Physical Graffiti, into a studio that they were comfortable with, at that time, what result would we have had if they didn't endure that experience that Robert went through, and the hiatus that they had to ultimately take, and then sort of, whether Robert liked it or not, obviously was not choice, had to put something out, had to get back to work, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So this is the result. You just wonder, like, what was out there in the ether that would have been put together alternatively. It's interesting, but here we are, and
yeah, you make a good point there. I think that the urgency that we've referred to, and the fact that you're just thrust back into this working relationship out of both what the hell else are you going to do, but also necessity. I think that for artists like Robert and Jimmy, and Robert dealing with the injury and stuff, he was either just going to sit at home and wilt away, or he had to go do this, right? And yet at the same time, he held a little bit of resentment that he was not quite forced to do this, but let's be real, kind of forced to do this. Zeppelin had to make money that year. They couldn't tour, so they had to do something.
Were they on an album
Contract.
Yeah, like
They had 3 more albums due to Atlantic. This and Through the Outdoor, and then Coda fulfilled the contract after
okay.
Bonham died. Yeah. And the one other thing I want to mention about Robert in this song is that the lyrics, you could, for those that are pro Robert lyrics and anti Robert lyrics, and by pro I mean they love his ability to kind of mix in this sort of fantasy elements, lofty language, and then for those that would be against Robert Plant, they'd say, well, he inspired the likes of Greta Van Fleet. Both of those people could look at the lyrics to Achilles' Last Stand and make their point, because it's as Robert Plant as lyrics could get. But there's a thing here, and this is not any tease for Killer Line, but this 4-line verse: slipping off a glancing kiss to those who claim they know. Below the streets that steam and hiss, the devil's in his hole. I don't know why, like, that's just one of like 8 verses in this thing. But to me, that's such a cool, this is why Presence works for me a lot. It has the sort of fantasy imagery, but also below the streets that steam and hiss. There is a hardiness and an industrial kind of churning quality to it. Does that make sense at all? It's like a dichotomy between, Tolkien and Upton Sinclair, the jungle, the fantasy and the urban, that makes this album just a fucking beast sometimes.
Yeah, no, what I got the sense of top to bottom, again, this is the last I'll speak of it on this pod, is the preface that you gave and all that they're going through between Physical Graffiti and this album. My takeaway, I want to revert back to what I was going to talk about all night tonight, which was my immediate feeling, the presence that I was in, as I listened to this top to bottom, mixed with the album art and everything else that I was able to kind of sense from being a listener that was going to go to the record store, pick things up, and, go top to bottom, track by track, is that this just hits hard. I think I'd messaged you at some point throughout the week, and I was like, Jesus, man, Royal Orleans. Like, I was just driving in the truck, and I was like prepping for the bachelor party that was ultimately going on, and I was like, this is just like, no matter where it falls in my ranking, man. I mean, you're talking about 7 songs that it was very tough, because there are few that I would say I completely dislike. There's none. It was more just like, where do I put these things in order? Because I truly, given dependent instance, love this. I was cooking one night and Candy Store Rock came on, and I found myself like moving and shaking, man. So you would never really know like when or how these are gonna kind of hit you, and it's in different elements from each album that preceded this one. So I appreciated the way they came in, and just like, it was almost like a quick storm. Like you're sitting around and all of a sudden you're out in your garage and the wind starts to blow and you look over and there's massive dark clouds. You got to gather the family, all the shit in the yard, pop inside. It moves through, and next thing you know, you look back outside and it's muggy and sunny again, and you're wondering what the hell just happened. To me, that is what this album was. It was just a boom.
Whiplash.
Quick freaking what just happened. And just as quickly as it started, it's over, and then you're left doing what we're doing, trying to piece it together and pick out the key pieces and what really makes the album, quote unquote, Zeppelin. So, that was my first initial instinct, was like, how do I navigate this thing? Because in pure Zeppelin form, they've put together a peculiar way of siding this thing and putting it all together, but also at the end of the day, you get done with it and you're unsurprised at how it resonates with you. And it's one that I will appreciate going back to now. This of all, I'll say this for sure, and then I'll end. This album of all their albums, I will appreciate going back to more than any of the rest. And I say that because all the rest are obvious. This one is one where when I go back to it, I'm probably going to remember a lot about what we're doing right now and why we're doing it, but also the fact that these tracks are ones that I feel a little bit more passionately about, that I learned about and enjoyed in this essence, as opposed to, having like historical thoughts of, even with your story about, being at Poppy's. Like, this is one where, to go ahead and search Presence and go to it takes a little bit more effort than just going to, this is Led Zeppelin or some of the greatest hits are one, two, or three.
Yeah.
But when you do, you're not disappointed. And I think that's the big takeaway here. So
Yeah, I think that it requires more investment from the listener, but it's not as if that investment isn't, as you said, rewarded. Just because it doesn't have the immediate riff earworms of a Black Dog or a Whole Lot of Love doesn't mean that there's not a lot of really rich material here. And I think the context of in which they recorded it and wrote it only makes it kind of cooler that they managed to pull this off. Now, we could talk more about Achilles Last Stand, and I'm sure that we will as we get into the Spiciest Biscuit picks, but let's move on here to track number 2. That would be For Your Life, which was kind of a forgotten track. And then in 2007, when they do the reunion gig in London, they play this. And I remember this was shocking on the message boards. I don't think Twitter was really around then, but wherever you would have Led Zeppelin fans meeting online, they thought, For Your Life, why? And yet, on that top to bottom really good show, one of the best performances is For Your Life. And they are so committed. It's almost like they wanted to reclaim presence and say, guys, you didn't pay enough attention to this when it came out. We aren't going to play you Achilles Last Stand at this show. You already know that. Here's For Your Life, and we're going to nail it, and it's going to sound as relevant as ever. And, that show would have been recorded 31 years after the album itself came out. And it sounded, whereas Black Dog sounded like 2007 Zeppelin playing Black Dog, For Your Life might as well have been 1976 Zeppelin, if that makes sense.
it does. And the sneaky part about that song for me is the length, because you're coming off Achilles Last Stand, 10 plus minutes. For Your Life is what? Apologies. What?
6 minutes, 20 seconds?
24. Second track is 6 minutes, 24 seconds, For Your Life. So, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it throughout. So for it to be deemed a deep cut, I guess, but I apparently in my time of living,
I was wondering where you're doing.
I wouldn't take it as a deep cut for me. I recognize this right off the bat. I enjoy it, and wouldn't associate it as such. But maybe that's like post reunion gig and onward that I would be, associating this song with. So that's interesting.
No, it was shocking. It was like people were putting together mock set list, and not a single one would have had this. They never played it live back in the day. They didn't play it in 77. They didn't play it in 79 at Nebworth or in 80. So people didn't know what Zeppelin themselves thought of this song. They play it. If they would have went on to do a reunion tour, I bet they would have kept playing it because they nailed it. And if I were in the audience at the O2 that night, I would have thought, well, that's interesting. And at first I might have had this tinge of disappointment that, oh, wait, I know they only have so many songs that they're going to play. So what did this cut out of the set list,
Right.
But then a minute in, I would have said, you know what? This is kind of cool. It to me, if anything, it would have indicated that, yeah, they were reuniting for good, or at least for a big tour, because why would they spend all that rehearsal time on frickin' For Your Life? Regardless, this is a song that I think that show helped kind of put in a new light for Zeppelin fans, myself included. And I returned to this on this album. I certainly never skip past this song. And in fact, over time, because I know Achilles Last Stand so well, and I don't always want to devote 11 minutes to a song, I sometimes just start with number 2. That's no slight on Achilles Last Stand, but the same way we talk about Kashmir and Stairway to Heaven, sometimes I just want to go forward to Misty Mountain Hop because I've already heard Stairway. And sometimes I want to go to In the Light because I've already heard Kashmir a bajillion times. Kind of that same effect here.
I agree. Definitely agree. And Achilles Last Stand it does what the players are doing, and it makes you feel probably how they felt when they got done playing that song too, which is not exhausted in a bad way, exhausted in I just killed a workout or anything else, and you feel rewarded, but also damn.
Wipe the sweat off your brow.
And I usually like to listen to Achilles Last Stand if I'm heading down the highway somewhere or I'm heading to a football game. Like if we're going to a Louisville tailgate, man, you can bet your bottom dollar that's probably on the playlist. For pregame. Like it's getting me up, and that's my drive coffee listen to get the juices flowing and the gas up before we head out and tailgate. So, but For Your Life is also a banger in my opinion, and one that doesn't disappoint. But I'm also kind of oftentimes jumping to. It's on my personal Zeppelin playlist as well.
Wow.
So again, when it was shocking that it was like a considered deep cut back even in '07, I was like, that's super interesting to me because I would have lost a ton of money saying that that wasn't one of the singles or the takeaway tracks from this album when it came out. So
Pissed Off Robert again. This is him referring to Los Angeles specifically. That was kind of a home away from home for Zeppelin. It's where they, well, I guess Malibu, which is in the area, but that's where they wrote these tracks. And
Malibu.
I'm sure that they probably saw some of the groupies and everything when they were out there because, I mean, why not? And I think that cocaine, hell of a drug, as they say.
It's a hell of a drug.
And it was ruining the scene. It was. I mean, it is something that it's a cautionary tale in so many rock stars' lives, and it didn't kill Jimmy, thank God. Heroin almost did. And it didn't kill John Bonham. That was booze. But it really made what happened the next year and a half rough. And 1977 was a really toxic year because of that drug and how omnipresent it was in that band and in their dressing room and on the Starship or whatever plane they had back then.
Yeah.
So this song, Robert recognizes that. And keep in mind, Ben, when they recorded and when they wrote this, I think he's 26. And now he's the wise, grizzled old man.
It's crazy.
That is, he even said himself in an interview, this is like him telling one of the young teenage girls, like, careful. Be careful with that stuff. And he's 26.
Yeah. In hindsight, knowing what I know now and these stories and the back end and everything else, and how he probably ultimately felt about Jimmy going into this, it would be a fuck yo couch, Jimmy.
Pretty much. This is a fuck yo couch Jimmy song if there ever was one.
Yeah.
And another couple coming up in these next two episodes. We move on to, speaking of couches, or I don't know if it would be a couch or a bed, but Royal Orleans.
How about a circular couch?
It could be.
Couch in the middle of a living room in a dilapidated, awful Airbnb.
They gave one of our friends a rash on his back and gave all of us. So long story short, I'm glad he brought this up. So Royal Orleans does take place in New Orleans, of course. The first time my wife and I were down there for a wedding, we purposely stopped outside of it. And I think I got a picture of it and I was like, if I post this on Instagram, no one's going to know that Zeppelin had this one song, Royal Orleans, on Presents. But I did point to it, and I told her this is where, like a proud grandpappy or something, this here hotel is where John Paul Jones mistakenly slept with a man. And they just turn it into a song. And it's well known. And you know what, John Paul Jones, knowing his dry wit, if like David Letterman brought it up on that interview he did with him in '08, he probably would have like sardonically played it off or something like that. But talk about autobiographical. Robert, did he get clearance? Did he just write the lyrics and assume that the guys weren't going to listen to what it's about? Especially when he says whiskers about who was in the bed.
Yeah, I won't pretend that any of what I'm about to say ties back to why I'm now bringing up this story. I want to preface with that. Not that I'm worried about it. I will also say that because given the time, this is a very 2025 subject for
yes,
band to be going through in Royal Orleans. That's honestly, when I was listening to the song in the truck, I was like, and I texted you, I was like, man, this is intense. And I'm listening to the lyrics as they're intended to be listened to, and I'm curious about the outcome. And you're like, do you know what it's about? And remember, I like trigger answered you, and you said exactly. So I kind of knew, obviously, going into this pod, what this specific album was about. But when I moved to Louisville in 2009, I'd been to New Orleans 0 times. Since 2009 to the present, I've been 16 times.
Wow, and lucky you. I love New Orleans.
A lot of it has to do with some bachelor parties that you and I have been on together, and then also a fraternity brother of mine who called New Orleans home and grew up there, went to Rummel High School and was big in the horse racing game and stuff like that. So for a multitude of different reasons with Louisville sports as well, went to the Final Four, and then also the Sugar Bowl was in New Orleans. So there, between sports, Louisville sports, and then also bachelor parties, and then just reasons to go there for spring breaks and stuff, I've been quite a few times. And coolest thing to me about this song is despite all the dark undertones and the quote unquote beef, if you will, that he took away from poor little JPJ. I couldn't imagine
I
like
know.
having beef with that guy, but again, you just don't know until you know that it does an amazing job in painting a picture of the damn city of New Orleans too, man.
Yeah.
Which, in most essence isn't very tough to do whenever you're writing, but this just has a way of doing it so articulately that like I know the streets he's talking about. I know the feeling he's talking about. Like you're always on your toes, but you're not at the same time. Like you go down there and you sort of let everything go, but you're also understanding where you're at. I'm not even going to go as far as call it dangerous, but there are dangerous parts of New
Oh,
Orleans.
100, there are, dude. Let's be, yeah, there are.
If you go down there with too much facade, you're not gonna probably not gonna end well. But you also like go down there and 9 times out of 10 you're not running any issue. Um, so I won't go as far as saying like this is would be one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs in any capacity, but I do wholeheartedly love the way that they uh how he put the foundation around it lyrically because to me it really painted a picture of like exactly what happened and he did so in explaining the surroundings and everything else that just painted a perfect picture of everything. So to the point of did he just not think they were going to look at the lyrics or get an essence of it? I don't understand how you could ever be in any recording capacity and not understand what was about to happen. And I'm trying to put myself in JPJ's shoes and be like, dude, what the fuck? Like, on the other hand, maybe I would take a look at it from the perspective I have now, which is like, damn, Robert, like, fuck, doesn't make me happy, but also that's pretty epic.
I mean,
Like,
no one, the thing is, this is before any biographies were out about Zeppelin, and no one knew about the John Paul Jones, what would have been transvestite back then until Hammer of the Gods, the biography came out in the 80s. So no one knew about it until that book said, this song is about this.
right.
So maybe they just thought, well, we'll get away with it, and they thought it was funny because it is kind of funny. And
Perhaps it is some poke fun too, where it's like they looked at it and they understood all of them understood what it was about and
yeah,
just thought, fuck it, man, that's too brilliant to not share. And it's perfect for what the tune is, and it's a very Orleans tune. I mean, it's one that now given the day could have a little preservation hall or something with it.
if there is a Zeppelin song that could somehow incorporate horns, maybe this would be it. And the thing about them is their lifestyle. They tired of traditional bars. So around the mid 70s, they were traveling America, and they're like, God damn it! They say this to Richard Cole. It's in his biography. Dude, find us someplace fresh. We're sick of the same haunts. We're sick of the same people. And they started going to gay clubs because they were just more fun, and they would be left alone, and they weren't just crawling with. I mean, imagine getting to a point where you're sick of groupies, but they were, right? So, not that they didn't indulge, but to me, this song is both light and dark. Light because, it's kind of a funny story, but dark because it is really getting into that just sort of decadence with which they lived on the road. And it, like you said, captures in some way that city, which you've been to far more than I have, but even the 3 times that I've been there, if you were to say, what's your favorite American city? I know New York City I have a lot of affinity for, but I don't think there's another city, not just in America, but the world, like New Orleans. And imagine being British boys experiencing that.
Oh, if Emily came to me, if any of you guys came to me and just hip shot said, we're wanting to go somewhere for a long weekend, where do you want to go? My number one top hip shot answer would always be New Orleans.
Maybe me too.
Dude, and the thing is there's so many different dichotomies to it. You can go 15 minutes one way and be in a fish town portion of New Orleans. It's completely different essence than a lot of people just think like Bourbon Street, and it's like, man, how many days could you spend down there? But the truth is now when we go back, we're down there on Bourbon Street maybe once the trip, and the rest of it we're, doing a lot of the other things. So it's by far probably my favorite city in the U.S., if not, top 2 or 3 for sure. And I mean, we're from Champaign, Illinois, man, 2.5 hours south of Chicago. Some of the most epic nights of all time in Chicago have been spent in Boys Town, and at clubs that we wouldn't have otherwise like wandered into if we weren't in the area of Wrigleyville or Boys Town. And man, it's just It's a lot of people after one mission, which is having a great time and not being apologetic about it, which I
Yeah.
think this song is truly about. I don't know if it's a beef song, man.
No, I don't think it is.
I think it's more of just like we went to Orleans, man, and we had a fucking time, and this was the end result. This is what we came out of it with. And again, like you said, these guys are from across the pond. This is trying to formulate a story about a place that probably the better part of 90% of their across the pond devout UK listeners have no idea about.
None.
You could read about it. You're never going to get the essence of it unless somebody tells you something like this.
It may as well have been Kashmir. Like
Right.
it's just, that's how foreign it would have been to most of their listeners back home.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fun tune. I'll be interested to see kind of where it lands on our spicy biscuits. Now, as we turn the side over, let's go back to the year 1976. So you have some nuggets from this very consequential year, at least for America. It was the bicentennial celebration.
Yeah, I want to start with something crazy. So, uh, obviously, the U.S. release date, sorry, United Kingdom release date was April 2nd.
So that's about a month after? No, just a week after. My bad. So March 31st was the American. Got it.
Yeah, March 31st. So, technically, if you look up the exact date of this happening, it was April 1st.
Okay.
The next day, but this was the day. This famous, I'll call it tech company, was officially formed by two gentlemen that it would be almost impossible for you not to know.
So Apple was Steve Jobs and Wozniak?
March 31st, 1976, Apple Computer Company was founded.
On that, wow.
That day. So it was a Wednesday.
Okay.
What a Wednesday, you know?
Jesus. In a garage in California, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some other takeaways there that might be interesting to some, but I'll spare it. You could look it up from big things happening that day. Let me see here. Let me get down to the goods. So, number one song on that day, and they break this down by song in the U.S., song in the U.K., and then what was the number one R&B song on that day? Obviously, there's kind of an overall thing. And
Let's start with America. So, what genre are we talking about?
Let's see. This is going to be pop, doo-wop, disco, R&B.
Huh. Bee Gees?
No.
Okay, so it's not jive talking. Pop, disco, doo-wop. Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons.
I'll let you know it is an African-American gentleman
Okay, Lou Rawls.
from Crawfordsville, Arkansas.
Crawfordsville. Isaac Hayes.
No, I don't know if you'll get this one. This is a surprisingly deep cut for having a number one tune.
Teddy Pettibaker? Or what's the name? Sorry, I messed that up.
Johnny Taylor.
I don't know Johnny Taylor. What's
Yeah.
the song?
And the song is Disco Lady.
I don't know Disco Lady. Would I know the British song?
That's also probably a heavy question mark. Here's what's crazy is you'll definitely know the second song in the U.S.
Okay.
Dreamweaver by Gary Ray.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
And here's I just got to throw this in there. The fourth song, U.S. top 5, March 31st of 1976. I was on an airplane. I was in an airport and on an airplane on a flight back from Cancun, Mexico this January. Our layover was in Houston back to Louisville, and I was on a flight right next to these gentlemen with their wives, both in the airport and in the airplane. Nicest gents on earth. But the fact that I looked this up and then there they are, number 4 in the U.S. The week that this album came out was mind blowing.
It's not Hall & Oates.
No,
It's not Loggins and Messina.
no,
Are they still active?
they are. Yeah, they were down there playing in Cancun together with their entire band when I was cross paths with them in the airport.
Is the name of the band just their two last names?
No, but it does incorporate brothers. Probably gonna give it away.
Oh, the Dubes?
No,
No.
that would have been awesome.
Is it Blank Brothers?
Yes.
The Isley Brothers?
No.
Why am I missing this? Who?
Bellamy Brothers.
The Bellamy Brothers?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the song?
Let your love flow.
Ah,
Let your love
shit.
flow.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay,
Um,
okay.
I was like, wow, this is cool because they were super nice.
You met the Bellamy. How did you know that they were musical artists?
So one, is his name Jeff? Apologies, guys. I'm gonna look this up really quick just so I don't get these first names wrong. So, um, they're a duo from Florida, and Howard Bellamy is like absurdly recognizable. He's just one of those guys that you look over and he's got the big mustache. To this day, it's gray now, but if you saw these guys, you would know they were somebody. So he approaches with a stunning wife. She was well into her 60s, but you just kind of get an essence that somebody is someone because
Yeah, sure. They exude
a different way.
something.
He was wearing this hip like Letterman jacket that like had hearts and stuff on it, and it was just kind of custom. So, like I do in any public facet, I'm sitting there in the Cancun airport, semi post toasty from a week in Cancun with friends. We always do an
Cozy
adult
little airport, by the way. Not very big.
Yeah, we always do like an offish, all inclusive, second or third week of January with just adult couples. We leave the kids at home with the grandparents, and we enjoy. So, here we are trekking back to the U.S. and I'm sitting in like a little restaurant with my wife, waiting for our friends to get through TSA, and down sits these folks. And I look over and I'm like, man, I haven't even said it out loud. I'm just like, this is somebody, and I should know who they are. Their drummer comes walking up, and he has the curly, like black hair. He's a younger dude.
Like a Jerry curl?
Yeah, he was not like he was no, it's more like a white boy fro kind of thing, but he
Okay.
obviously was not original drummer, but he is now. He sits down and he puts his backpack down, which has like all of his backstage passes, artist passes and stuff on it.
So
And I
now
look
you know
down
that there's somebody.
and I see the Bellamy Brothers logo, and I'm like, my dad, right here, right next to all my Zeppelin albums, I've got Bellamy Brother albums on vinyl.
Oh,
And
shit.
so,
Okay.
yeah, so then I automatically just start throwing them on Spotify. I'm getting up to speed really quickly with the songs that I grew up on, and then I just went for it. I like walked over to him and I said, "Man, Howard," and he's like, "How's it going?" I was like, I can't own this because I wasn't original, but my dad was a huge fan. I grew up on your albums and just love a lot of your guys'
That's
music."
cool, man.
But then he said, "Pull up a seat." So I sat for a little bit, talked to him, and met his wife and the other guys on the tour and stuff like that. And then they ended up. It was kind of one of those awkward like Michael Cera moments from Superbad where it's like, bye, because then we were on the same flight together. They were like 2 rows behind me. So ultimately, there probably would have been a conversation at some point that didn't have to happen right then. But who knows, man? I saw him and I was like,
Sure.
the
Yeah.
moment strikes itself. But yeah, I thought that was cool. The let's see the others on here. The U.S. Johnny Taylor, Disco Lady. Obviously Gary Wright, Dreamweaver. The third, unfamiliar with these folks, but Captain and Tennille.
Oh, Captain and Tennille. You don't know Captain and Tennille? Love will keep us together?
No, this was a Lonely Night.
Okay.
Angel.
You know what's funny is Captain and Tennille were the name of my father and mother-in-law's. They had 2 cats, and they named them Captain and Tennille back in the day. They were huge. Super popular.
And then I got to give the shout out to number 5. So 1-word name for the band.
Okay.
It's with an R. And you and I both enjoy this.
Well, Rat wasn't out yet, and we don't like Rat.
No.
Rufus.
Boom. Yep.
Tell me something good?
No.
They had another hit. Okay.
Sweet thing.
I wonder if that's a Shuggy Otis cover.
I believe it probably has to be.
God dang. Shuggy getting some love. I love Shuggy. Well, you introduced me to Shuggy.
Yeah. So those were. It's gonna be quick now because obviously we got 4 tracks we got to get through. It's a long one from that, but I thought that was interesting, and I knew as soon as I saw the Bellamy Brothers tidbit, I was gonna have a little story tied to this. But I thought the most interesting was the fact that Apple was also founded this same day as Presence came out. And man, can I get really articulate really quick? Mm-hmm. So the album art, which we'll get to.
We'll talk about that during I think alternative album titles. We can do that too because that's going to feed into mine.
It will. So we'll get to it. I just thought how interesting that quote unquote the object could also be described in modern day lore as any Apple product whatsoever because
Yeah.
it's just so captivating. So
No, you're right. 100%.
those two things came out in the exact same day. So there
The,
we go.
the, the fact that all the people on the album cover are basically, even if they aren't intentionally looking at the object, it's omnipresent. It's
You know it's
there. So that's like yeah. Prophetic. One of my favorite Zeppelin album covers. We'll talk about it later too. Before we flip the album cover, or before we flip the album over to side B, the number one movie in America, Ben, on March 31st, 1976. What do you think? Starring Jack Nicholson. It won Best Picture at the Oscars.
Are we talking One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest?
Well done. Number one movie in America. There you go. Let's flip it over to side B here and kick things off with Nobody's Fault But Mine. This, along with Achilles' Last Stand, were the only two songs from this album to be performed by Zeppelin in 77, 79, and 1980. In fact, those two songs were, I think, in every set during their run. This was also performed at the 2007 reunion show. This song, to give you the lineage, Ben, is, I want to make sure I get this accurate, Blind Willie Johnson recorded the first version of this way back in 1927. And then this version specifically was influenced by Robert Johnson, who was the blues man who died at age 27, who allegedly sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads. His 1937 song, Hellhound on My Trail, was very influential to the lyrical content of Robert's version. Call and response, kind of Black Dog-esque. You got a hypnotic main riff. There's that word again. Blistering harmonica solo. I mean, I'm trying to think, Ben, what are Robert's big harmonica solos? You Shook Me.
Yeah.
There's a little harmonica on Bring It On Home. None on Led Zeppelin 3. There's at the end of When the Levee Breaks.
That was going to be my other one is
Custard Pie.
Custard Pie, Black Country Woman. We didn't have a ton of good things to say about that one.
But this is his.
Yeah.
This is his moment.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, what a sick. I mean, it just comes in, and the band behind him sounds great, of course, too. But like that harmonica solo, it's the first one. The guitar solo comes later. The harmonica solo is blistering. So good.
Yeah. We said You Shook Me as well.
You Shook Me was another good one of my favorites. But this one, and again, the 2007 version, like Robert, he blew that heart, man. Did you see, Ben, by the way, when you were doing any research on this, Rick Rubin?
On this specific album, I did not.
Oh, can I give you a Rick Rubin nugget?
Go ahead.
Okay, so Rick Rubin, record producer, he described the song structure as, quote, a traditional blues twisted through a trippy psychedelic filter. They played with such precision, doing these odd arrangements that sound like loose jams, but are really choreographed. I would agree with Rick, because when I played on drums just for fun, it's only because I've listened to the song enough that I can get the arrangement. But the first 4 or 5 times, there's enough start, stop that I don't know who's going to come in when. Yep. And, this song could so easily get boring with its repetition. I don't think so. I think it manages to walk that line where the repetition is just enough to like really draw you in. So, there's 3 or 4 songs, Ben, on this album that I was debating for Spiciest Biscuit. This is among those 3 to 4. It's why I'm talking with such affinity about it. But was this one you were familiar with before you took a deep dive back into this week?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought so.
Yeah. I mean, it's up there with most of the notable intros to Zeppelin. I mean, you could play the first 8 to 10 seconds of this song for most and say who is it, and it's audibly going to be Zeppelin. So it's not tough. And even if you can't paint the song off that, you know exactly what you're getting into and who it is. So and familiarity without being blatantly familiar. Like Black Dog, I can say Black Dog in the opening essence. This is just one that I'm like, yep, I've heard it. Can't really paint a picture of where or when for the first time, but I know it. So
You know what's a little
I
bit
know,
more
and
actually?
I know it enough that I can sing it, which I thought was super peculiar to me because like I'm in my truck and I'm listening to Presence, which I'm like I've set no standards for. I haven't really. I was going in just kind of blind, hoping that it would capture me the way it ultimately did. But then you get to certain tracks and you're singing along with them because you know it. I'm like, okay, well
It's
that's
it's
all I need to know.
more You Shook Me than Black Dog, and here's why. Because it is call and response in parts of it, but mostly it's Robert and Jimmy in unison. Na 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 na, and just like in You Shook Me, I said you shook me, babe, and they're singing and playing together. So there's an element of that. There is the fact that this song takes a traditional blues and it opens up with this flange guitar that's so 70s, right? Like it's the most produced thing in the album, maybe. And it really turns it into something wholly unique. And I think you hit it right there. It doesn't sound, at first glance, oh, this reminds me of this track from Led Zeppelin 3 or 4. It is its own thing. And I think an immediate highlight on the album, and there's a reason that they selected it to play at shows, and there's a reason they selected to play it at the 2007 show. Um, I think it's a really great distillation of the fact that Zeppelin was influenced by the blues. But for people that would criticize Zeppelin for being derivative, this shows that they really did spin it in their own way. And I think it's probably their most unique blues song because earlier attempts like Lemon's Song, for example, are very much your traditional 12-bar blues. This is like if the blues came down from Mars. Like it's just different enough.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. I mean, it's trying to formulate kind of my first influence because again, I in hearing that song specifically over the years would have lost a ton of money and not ever said that it was on their seventh album. I mean, I would have probably gone through the gauntlet of saying, was it on? I probably would have started with physical graffiti, and then I would have
It
worked my way.
sounds like it could have been.
Somebody would have been like, no, and I'm like, okay, well then it's got to be House of Holy, no. And then as I got closer and closer, I'm like, well, it's not on any of those. Where the hell was it? Type of deal because it seems like an earlier work too. Just based on the result and kind of what it is. So have you speaking of your statement about, drumming to it and so forth, are you familiar with the group online? They do YouTube videos called Drumeo where they'll put like an
No.
art. So they'll set like a drummer down, Chad Smith for Red Hot Chili Peppers, for
Oh,
instance, right?
okay. No, I'm sorry. I misheard you. Yes, I have seen these before. Yeah.
Yes. Set a drummer down. He's a famous drummer for a band. And I don't know how this is possible because knowing you and I with music and stuff, but knowing the actual drum tracks of these. But what they do is they find folks that, and they'll go through a song list. So you don't see this on the video, but they'll say, have you heard this song before? And they'll say, yes. So they go on, but they'll get to a song that they haven't heard before. The mind blowing portion is typically where it's like, have you not heard that song before? But they'll jump in. And what they do is they play an isolated track that doesn't include the drums.
And pretty much nail what the thing would have been.
Most times the most impressive ones that you see on YouTube are where the drummers just go into it and they're like, how the fuck are they doing that when they haven't heard it before? And it's different, but it's obviously like pretty close to what it could have been. I mean, you can do the same thing. I mean, we've done it like I think our rendition of Idiot Box by Incubus for years was done by you in the way that you first interpreted it.
Yeah, I did not listen to the studio track. And
I
you
love,
guys
but
seem to
this
dig
one-
it, so
And nobody's fault but mine. I would absolutely love to see a drummer try to attack because of the space that they leave between the call and response, and then where bottom comes in. With like the da 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 da, and then when they go into it, where it's like, what would a drummer be doing in what ultimately is the downtime, which I think make the song most powerful because it's giving it that space that's needed before they kind of jump back into things, and then he's sort of doing his own not call and response, but he's resonating along right with the lyric sometimes, and then also the guitar sometimes, where I would be curious to see where a drummer would implement the drums without hearing Bonham's track over it. I think that'd be awesome.
my favorite part of the song is when you get maybe midway through na 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 ba 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 na 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 ba ba ba. Okay, they do that 4 times through, and then the next one is na 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 ba ba boom boom bam boom ba 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 boom bam boom boom ba na ba boom bam boom ba na na na. So you see John Paul and John, and this is what I love, dude, because like as a band, the band I'm in now, we're working on new stuff. So we're trying to figure out, our songs are simple enough, so we try to find rhythmic variations that make it fun for us to play. And what's a cool, like, turn from one phrase to the next that makes it a little bit weird, or like how can we make the second verse different than the first? So I can just picture these guys in the studio and John Paul and John saying, okay, well, as you guys are doing that, yeah, we got the boom, ba-da-da. Okay, we got that part. But what if the fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth times you guys do that, we start adding like more of a groove, and it just plays off each other so well. And it reminds me that the call and response thing I talked about, it's not Robert call and response to Jimmy. It's the rhythm section call and response to the guitar and the vocals. So there's just enough cool wrinkles in the song that takes what could have been a bit of a drag. Like it's 6.5 minutes.
Yeah,
not feel like it at all.
I can also see why Rick loves it so much. Rick is like a stickler for the Beatles and Zeppelin and just the majesty that is like writing in that capacity. And I'm not going to go as far as saying that this resonates in any capacity with any Beatles tunes or Wings tunes for that matter, but it also has like a very underlying artistry to the way it was put together that a guy like Rick Rubin, who is a deep-seated producer and thinks he has corners figured out and stuff like this, is probably scratching his head at this one. And it's one of those where that's where these guys get most excited, because then their creative juices start flowing, because it's like, fuck, man, like, and then you look at the capacity they wrote the album in and the days that they wrote the album in and what they were coming off of when they were putting this album together. It almost seems like, I mean, now that I know, so many odds were stacked against them, like all across their career. And I'm not going to like sugarcoat it like they were like without. I mean, they had all the resources and everything. And at this point they were making boatloads of money and having the experiences that they were having. But like, this specific album, they're still producing stuff like Nobody's Fault But Mine, despite everything else going on. And it's like, so if you don't believe that there's like just magic, same as the Beatles, man, in some of their darker years, I'm going to go into a deeper place right now that's going to piss a lot of people off. But just for those that don't know, Dave Matthews' darkest period was Busted Stuff, man. And like that album to me is fucking gospel. I mean, there's just so many deep cuts.
I told someone at the show last weekend, I just a casual observation. When artists are not in a great frame of mind, they tend, like when they're in a sad or angry state of mind, they tend to produce more compelling material than they do when they're happy.
Because there's a crux to that, and it happens in like the sales world. It happens in the business world as well. When you're not in a room of a bunch of yes men or people that will agree to get along, good things happen. Like when there's friction, it probably means that there's a different idea or a better way of formulating something. And most times, like in the essence of a Dave Matthews Band, where you're doing songs like Raven and Busted Stuff and Captain, dude, stuff that like wasn't their MO back then, but now from a fan standpoint, you play any one of those songs live and the crowd is going absolutely bonkers. It's because there was a rift somewhere along the way that it wasn't as easy as saying, hey guys, I've got one. And then the rest of the band goes along with it because you've had 100 others before it, and it might not be great. It's just now that person feels obligated and feels the power to bring it in, and everybody else follows. It's when people say, I don't think that's it, man. And I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that for this album. Like, let's go back to the drawing board, or that's not where I think we need to be putting these things. And that, for the most part, albums 1 through 6, it also seems very cohesive. Like you can kind of sense the band is flowing and sort of in a forward motion together. It never seemed like they were ever running in opposite directions.
There's more tension on this one though.
Yeah, there is. There's lyrically and sonically some directional stuff that fucks with your brain as you're listening. So,
and to that point, I don't think when I say that artists being sad or whatever, or depressed or angry, means that when they're actually making the music, they aren't having fun. So what I mean by that is when Zeppelin performed this and they nailed that take, I'm sure that the four of them looked at each other like, oh yeah, hell, that's the one. But I think to that point, it is the tension that exists beforehand that somehow it informs the music with a bit more urgency and a bit more like, God, they really had to kind of struggle to get this. Like, we talked about the word rewarding earlier, that this is a rewarding album in some ways. And I think part of that is because you can tell the struggle that was behind it. And even if you didn't know the historical context, I'm sure that as you were listening to it mowing or whatever, you would have picked up on a bit of that. Man, this doesn't sound like as easy as the track Houses of the Holy when they were at Mick Jagger's summer estate and Jimmy just goes, no, 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 no. That song would not work on Presence more than any Led Zeppelin album because Presence is like, there's an edge. There's no edge to Houses of the Holy. I love that song, but it's an earworm with not a lot underneath. Presence has all these like kind of suppressed emotions and the weight of a band that for 7 years had been doing this without really much in the way of release. If you think about it, like, yes, they're the biggest band in the world. They're super rich. They're super powerful. And yet this really terrible thing happened to their frontman. And they were too young to really know how to deal with this in a healthy way. So all they do is just go right the fuck back in the studio and churn this thing out.
Yeah, diamonds are made under pressure, man. And like I guess I wouldn't go as far as like saying that this entire album is a diamond, but in the same respect, like Nobody's Fault But Mine resonates throughout their entire catalog. So good things are still happening despite the essence of what's going on. From another perspective, to button that up, and I love your thought on that, Mike, it doesn't mean that these guys look back at these songs with angst. Like
they don't at all. They like this album. Jimmy and Robert especially like this album.
And that's what's most interesting is I think when a product is finalized and you start to play it and get your reps, so to speak, on those tunes, they take on a mind of their own and a new meaning. It's all about that pocket and that comfortability too. And then most importantly, how it resonates with your audience. And if they're loving it, you're probably loving it, and especially if it feels good to play. What I'm thinking is from the perspective of fans and the label and everyone around them, that there was a pressure coming to this album regardless of how brilliant it was going to be. It doesn't matter the scenario. Seventh album, you're thinking, can they still do it? Do they still have it? What are they going to come with now? They're thinking maybe we shouldn't come with what people are expecting. Let's go a different direction. You know, there's a million bands out there that have gone an acoustic route here, or, you know, a completely exploratory route, and it either works or it falls flat on its face. I still kind of hold true to my first instinct on this one, was like a quick storm that just blew up out of nowhere and was over before it began. But the fact that they enjoyed playing these tunes after the album actually did resonate with them after the fact. I think that the album, which I'm looking forward to getting in terms of the artwork, is something that I've read they're proud of. Label was proud of, and their producers and everybody were proud of. So it's just, all things weren't pointing to that there was this much underlying tension. And I think a lot of what we've talked about tonight and the underlying tension sort of resided with Robert, and then may have sort of trickled over in the fact that, you know, Jimmy was in the thralls of his addictions back then. So the bystanders, if you will, were JPJ and Bonzo that were like, man, we're just trying to do what we do and, you know, keep with it. So
I'm sure Bonham probably had a few rough nights when they were recording music too. I mean,
150%. But you know, he was the workhorse of the band from the aspect of that dude was never really off when they were on. So it just is an interesting dichotomy of everything. But I will say, you know, it was a long-winded way of saying that either after listening to us talk about it now or initially, you have a sense that something is going in opposite directions, and it's not a bad thing. For the first time in the first six albums, now on the seventh, there is this element that is peculiar in sense because for almost every track leading up to it, you have a sense that they're working in unison. And that was the peculiar thing. You're like, how are they doing this in such lockstep, album after album after album? And for me, what I kept hearing, and I had to re-listen to it over and over again, was like, am I hearing this right, or am I just trying to figure out a difference with this album now that we're on seven and I need something new to talk about? But sure enough, and it starts with Achilles Last Stand, where you're like, what is Robert doing here? And why is he doing it this way? Because this isn't what he would do before he'd leave Space. And
Yeah.
we get to nobody's fault but mine, and they're doing this call and response, and it's working, and the rhythm section is doing something different too. It just is refreshing, but also puzzling. And I think that's why ultimately this album resonates the way that it does. So
I think it's all they knew how to do. I think it was just, okay, we have some adversity, and it's the same way that, well, I was about to say an artist that we might cover recently, so scratch that. I was about to say, same way that this one album, this one band, their third album, they kind of did this. No, I'm not going to mention that because it would be a spoiler for what we do next. Okay, we're going to move on, and that discussion was, I think, fruitful because, that track embodies a lot of what this album's about. But the next one is kind of an anomaly on it, which is Candy Store Rock, and it is a 50s little bopper. And there's not much that I could really find about the making of this song. And, it began apparently, Ben, from a jam during Over the Hills and Far Away, which I guess if you think about the solo section, that solo section in that song, when they would jam it out live, it kind of inspired Candy Store Rock. They turned in this 50s rockabilly number, and they just kind of did it on a lark. There's not much in the way of, animosity or tension on the song. It's just a rock song, though very unusual, because I was listening to it today, and I could not for the life of me figure out the freaking time signature during the outro. They're kind of bopping around. Starts off like that, and then the last minute they revert to something where I can't tell where the one is. And I'm like, if you asked me to play along with this on the drums, despite hearing this song many times, I couldn't do it without kind of stumbling over myself. So it's Zeppelin rockabilly, but with this typical Zeppelin weirdness that makes it not like what you would think it would be.
100%. I want to give this song a fair shake in essence of the fact that it is so standalone that you could easily revert to the nomenclature that we've given to our other beloved bands where it's like, what are you doing? Like, that's not you guys, but also there's an underlying brilliance of like, maybe that is why you're doing it, and something felt good for you guys and you're enjoying it.
It's filler, but is it better than the crunge? You don't need to answer that for the categories coming up if you don't.
But what I'll say is that you take it for what it is, and like I said in the beginning, the rankings of this album are going to come out in way of there's only 7 tracks here.
Right.
So it's not calling any one of them less than, but it is an easy scapegoat to say that one may not be like Zeppelin or what you would consider to be Zeppelin in capacity of this album or any of their catalog to date. It's cool to see that there was like a description stating as much from even their perspective. It's like,
it doesn't mean a lot to them.
This was something we're throwing at the wall and we're trying to see how it feels, but it's also a good time. Like I said, man, I was cooking on Sunday, got back from a bachelor party and we're trying to figure out what to do and for dinner and putting stuff together for the family. And here this song comes on and I was moving to it, man. So, I
think it's a decent album track. And as far as filler is concerned, it's one of those Zeppelin songs over the years I've never quite latched onto. And at the same time, there's this weird, mysterious quality to it. There's not much in the way of a hook. It's a rockabilly song, but there's still a hint of darkness. I don't know. It does sound like a band doing a rockabilly song in a basement studio in Munich, Germany, in the dead of winter. In a weird way. It's not like...
I also don't know if I ever thought about this as drastically until this exercise with all 7 albums we've done so far, but something that has definitely occurred to me is that naming credentials for songs do matter to me.
If this does not sound like candy store rock.
Yeah. Well,
Sounds like some kind of rock, but not candy store.
I hear candy store rock. The first thing that comes to mind for me is that goofy candy store owner in Willy Wonka that's like the candy man can,
Right.
and I'm like, okay, so now I'm on the corner of a brick road, much probably like the one that these guys grew up on in the UK, and there's a goofy dude in a candy store outfit and so on and so forth. There's a bunch of kids hanging out front, whatever. And yeah, the name it alone puts you in a headspace from past experience going into the song that sort of paints the picture for how the song may or may not go, versus like a song like T for One, where to me the name and the song back up what's happening.
Perfect. Yeah, you're right. I think that the title.
I want to know it. T for One, I want to go press play on that track because I want to know what the fuck it's about, and it's enticing, and I have no idea. I would be less inclined to like search out and be like, oh, tell me a little bit about Candy Store Rock.
See, I'm intrigued by Candy Store Rock, and I thought Fool in the Rain sounds more like Candy Store Rock. Because
Really?
candy,
Okay.
I hear candy, I think color.
To each their own, right? To
Yeah.
each their own.
No,
And
but I would agree. T for One, and we'll get to that as an amazing title.
I just think for me, yeah, T for One, I gotta back my statement up by saying I think T for One for a song title is
Up there.
up there.
Yep.
Candy's, maybe it's the fact that it has the word rock in it. That might just be it. And I think there's purpose behind that, knowing it's
Throwaway.
rock,
It's filler.
rockabilly tune. Not bashing it. I'm just saying that Candy Store Rock, it's like Mondo Rock. Love it too. But like the rock in it, it's like, well, wouldn't we get that interpretation versus you telling us that it's rock? Like that, does that make sense? So
It's like Blank Blues. Yeah,
even if it was just Candy Store, I'd be like, oh, but can't. So that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, we're moving on here to Hot's On for Nowhere, which
Fuck
is
you, Jimmy. Candy Store Rock. What the fuck were you thinking, dude? No, that's not what I was.
Hot's On for Nowhere. Cool title though, and I was intrigued when I first saw the track listing of it. And this is just a riffapalooza. I mean, the rhythmic things going on, the guitar riffs. This is one that immediately grabbed me the first time I listened to it. Where I probably listened to this more than any of the songs when I first got the album from my 6th grade girlfriend. And this was never played by Zeppelin live. It was played by Jimmy Page and the Black Crowes. This one is another angsty Robert song. Specifically this line, I got friends who give me fuck all. I think the only example of fuck or really any expletive in any Zeppelin song. Specifically, this is about Jimmy Page and Peter Grant not truly caring about what happened to his family after that big car wreck. This is written in Malibu, so Robert, I think, was in a weird headspace, Ben, where it's like he was happy to be there on one hand because he was out of the house, but on the other hand, he saw the same old shit when he got out there, and he thought, is this really all there is? Like, it's either my family life at home and my wheelchair, or I got to come back out to California with all these hangers-on and loser groupies and coke-addled dealers, and Jimmy's a junkie pretty much, and... yeah, I can see why his lyrics in this and For Your Life are just so dripping with venom. He's done, man. He's done with it.
Insane.
But he can't, but at the same time, he can't be done with it. You know what I mean? He can't quit Led Zeppelin. He knows that. So he has to get it out in the songs.
Pour it. I mean, we sort of prefaced it in our early talks, but I also think he had like the ability now and the runway and the I'm not even going to call it invincibility, but definitely the fact that if you're staring something in the face that's between I'm okay with this being done or not, that you put a different approach to it. And if the fallback of this is you've gone too far, you've, maybe leveraged too much of your artistic ability, he could argue that he's done it the entire career. It's just not ever been in a way that, disturbed the other bandmates in any way. So I think it's pretty interesting, man. But also just maybe this was a precursor to where things ended up at the same time, So
This song, I think, is such a treat musically where, Jimmy with the Like, that's just one of about 8 awesome riffs throughout this thing. It has that start-stop thing a little bit like Nobody's Fault But Mine, and I think just inspired performances by everybody. So the shuffle from John Bonham during some of the verses, the guitars, of course, the bass is all over, just very nimble. And Robert, despite the lyrics sounding like a pissed off guy, the tone does not sound pissed off. So this has an airiness and a bounce to the step that makes this much more enjoyable than if you were to read the lyrics, you would think it would be. So I always like, Ben, songs that have that dichotomy. Dark lyrics, upbeat music. And this seems to be one of those examples.
Yeah, I agree. It's perfectly timed too. I don't know, man. Like,
this album needs, after Candy Store Rock, an injection of energy.
Yeah, I'm all for, lengthy diatribes of things like Achilles' Last Stand and, Stairway to Heaven and things of that nature where it's going to take you on a journey. But I also love just a good, 4-minute, 30-second, 5-minute flat song. It's not too short. It's also not long enough where I think this delivers. And there's so much going on in 4 minutes and 42 seconds too that it's just kind of a perfect balance to what side 2 ultimately is. I mean, Nobody's Fault But Mine, into Candy Store Rock, whether you love it or it's just a throwaway song, you're probably pretty hungry for something that's going to bring you back to life, and Hot's On for Nowhere does that right on the welcome mat of, what's to come next. So
yeah, which we're going to get to here in a second. Last thing I'll say about this is when Jimmy Page and the Black Crowes re-released their live album, they finally included Hot's On for Nowhere. I had no idea that it was left off the original. So I'm visiting Nate in Austin. I'm going for a run, and that Friday they re-released it, and I see, holy shit, they played Hot's On for Nowhere, and it was the first one I went to just because it was fresh. I'd never heard their version of it, and it is predictably awesome. All right, this album ends not with a song that has, how would we say? Not with a song that, like Hot's On for Nowhere, mixes that happy sound with sad lyrics. It's sad lyrics, it's sad song, it's T for One. It is a perfect title for the song. It is somewhat of a sister song to Since I've Been Loving You, some of the same chord progressions. It's a little bit longer. There is no big climax. There is no release in the way that Since I've Been Loving You gives it. And Ben, you mentioned this about this album, that it doesn't give you a whole lot of release. It kind of builds and builds, and I think that's to its credit. There's something admirable about that. Do you find T for One as an album closer to be satisfying?
That's a loaded question when it comes to this specific track, because I think the delivery comes in the first 20 seconds of the song. The opening riff is what immediately pulls you in and keeps you, and there's no denying that. Honestly, the entire song, every single time I listen to it, is like trying to watch, I don't know, Shawshank Redemption, because I know the outcome, but I'm pretending like I don't the entire time. Maybe it's going to go a different direction. The opening riff pulls you in, and the rest of the song is so enjoyable. And you said it, and I actually asked you this week leading up to our pod, I think it was on Monday, has there ever been any grief with the fact that T for One almost breaches into close proximity to Since I've Been Loving You without ever actually getting there? And man, it gets really tastefully close. But I leave every verse and chorus of this song wondering blindly, are they going to go back to that opening riff at some point? And they don't. So ultimately, by the end, I'm in love with the end product because of what they do throughout. And I don't think it leaves you dissatisfied.
No.
Journey. But I also think that there is just an essence of where was the climax and where was the delivery, so to speak. And then I think to myself, it was at the beginning, and they gave it to you without you knowing you have it in your hands the entire time. That's the way I interpret this. And like when I think about that, guess what I do? I start the fucking track over again, and there I am. So
Yeah,
they win.
you can get lost in it. I think that Jimmy and Robert are amazing. I think that Robert's low key vocals are perfect. He doesn't scream at all in this thing. It is matching the lyrical content. I think that Jimmy is super tasteful. And one could call this boring if they were being cynical about it. I think that it achieves what it wants to, which is capturing loneliness. It's T for one. There's no release. There's no catharsis. There's nothing exciting. It's the fact that you just got to sit in it. To me, there's not a better rainy day Zeppelin tune than T for one. I liked it from the first time I heard it. I will put it on when I just want to chill. And it doesn't make me sad, which I think is the cool thing about sad songs. I don't think sad songs are meant to make you sad. They're meant to make you relax or sometimes confide in the fact that even a guy like Robert Plant at one point was sad as well. So to me, it's a really cool approach to end an album where if you think about it, Physical Graffiti ended on Sick Again, House is the Holy, The Ocean. You had Led Zeppelin 4 with When the Levee Breaks. In other words, the last three ended with big rockers, you know. I mean, Sick Again, we didn't either particularly like, but it's a riff rocker. This is not that. So I kind of appreciate the divergence from the idea that you need to end an album with a big bang. Instead, it kind of ends with a whimper, but I think a compelling one. So
Yeah.
I've always been a fan of this song.
I agree. And just to interpret the name of the song T for one, I think it's much more of an English terminology. You take T, and that usually includes more than one.
Yeah.
So
The title alone evokes
yeah,
loneliness.
yeah, it's T for one, and then that prompts you to say what's going on here from the first note. But I mean, it would be hard pressed to deny the fact that the opening riff is
Ugh.
like a standalone. If you isolated 20 seconds of the top 20 Zeppelin songs of all time, and you only were given the first 20 seconds, I'm gonna say this: T for one would be number one.
Whoa.
I think, man, because the riff alone is like it's the one where if it was played over and over again, or there was a standalone song that had that riff encapsulated with it, I mean, it is so freaking good, dude.
It's
That is a
amazing.
rock and roll riff, and it could have been done by anybody, and I would be just as obsessed with it. But I do enjoy the fact that it was done in a way that leaves you wanting more. I think that's the beauty behind it, really. If it was just exhausted to no end, it may not resonate the same way. So maybe my statement is fuck all to say it like these boys do. But it just, man, it is so capturing. And when we get to the rankings, I can't wait to explain where I put this thing, because that specific element made it really tough for me to figure out where this thing goes, because
Yeah.
my gut was like, I think that speaks for itself. The other half of me is like, there's,
8.5 minutes left.
there's another 8.5 minutes that I'm trailing behind on
But
this.
to that point, the riff has a melancholic quality to it. It's not a happy riff. It's a cool riff, but it's not. I don't know. There's a hint of the sadness that the song brings. I think it's a really cool choice. That if they would have just started with the blues part, then it's just an 8.5 minute blues dirge. That little choice makes it really unique. And I bet the first listen, I remember my first listen, I remember distinctly at my grandpa's house thinking, well, they got to go back to that riff. I don't know how they were going to do it. It was just too good of a riff not to go back to. And then they don't. And you think, well, what the hell was that doing there? And then, I don't know, it just adds to that kind of, like I said, impenetrability about this album, how, it's both immediate because of the instrumentation, but songwriting-wise, I'm still trying to figure out why they made choices they did. I kind of like that. I like the mystery would be too vague of a term, but I kind of like the fact that I'm still figuring out, why might they have decided to do that for an otherwise straightforward song? So, yeah, cool little wrinkle that they make that I think makes T for one That much better because of those 20 seconds. And I like the other 8.5 as well. So I don't want to be mistaken for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Real
Agreed.
quick, reception for this album was mixed. I mean, let's be real. There is not much in the way of immediate hits on this album. It's one that you have to listen to a few times. It felt like a bit of a rush job. There was no tour to back it up. So overall, the album reaction from the critics was, like a 3 stars out of 5. There was one very positive one from Rolling Stone from Stephen Davis. And Stephen Davis was ultimately the person that wrote the Hammer of the Gods biography. So he was a Zeppelin fan in many aspects. He said that this established Zeppelin as the premier heavy metal act, and it features some exceptional rock music, though others, like Robert Christgau, were less enthusiastic. In The Village Voice, he wrote that Hot Song for Nowhere is, quote, a commanding cut. I would agree with that, but he found much of the rest of it forgettable. And then Neil McCormick of the Daily Telegraph claimed that it was Zeppelin at their most blunted. That's not a compliment, I guess, because he gave it 2 stars out of 5. Finally, a retrospective review from Q, and this is written recently, gave the album 3 out of 5 stars and said Presence sounds as rushed as it was. So, Ben, this seems like an example of fans, the fans that really know the band. This is the sexy pick for their, most underrated Zeppelin album. I would go so far as to say it is underrated. I would not go so far as to say it's their best album, or even top 3 or top 4 maybe, but I am probably more forgiving of it than critics were back when it was released. And it's not like the general public loved it as much either. It didn't sell nearly as well as their others.
Yeah, I had seen a quote as well, and it was from Mick Wall. He's like a big metal and rock writer, British music journalist. He's done like Sabbath, REO, Thin Lizzy, Dire Straits, but he made the statement that it pulled Led Zeppelin back from the brink of crisis.
Probably, yeah.
I think it's interesting because then they continued on after this, which maybe they had a sense of the product that we talked about and the avenue that they went down, where during the time it may have been a bit tumultuous, but they still put it together and, maybe found pockets of why they continue to do what they do together. So.
Yeah, I think retrospective reviews, because it was reissued in 2015, they were all in the way of like 4 out of 5 stars, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. I think people have grown to respect the album for what it is, and that it is not shat upon by people. I think, if anything, it's interesting how when In Through the Outdoor came out in 1979, people thought that was a return to form. And time has been, I think, less kind to In Through the Outdoor and more kind to Presence. And I would say that's probably accurate when you look at those 2 albums. But we'll get to In Through the Outdoor next week.
Yeah.
Is it time?
It is time. I wanted to ask one question too.
Sure.
Again, a reminder that I'm not looking ahead. I as we end these pods, the first thing I do before I wrap it up for the night is look at the track listing and the album of the next. But this question is because of the deluxe edition of this.
Yes. Are you asking about Carrot's Pod?
10 ribs and all. Carrot pod. Like what's going on there?
Have you checked it out?
No, because
Yeah.
I'm just realizing that there's more. So
yeah, I'll send you the link after this. It does not sound like anything that would belong on this album. It's like a piano, drums, and guitar jam. No vocal. And I can't really even describe. Almost sounds soft rock. It's bizarre. I mean, from the name, 10 ribs and all, Carrot pod, and then parenthetical pod. So there's 3 pods in the title. Anywho,
we really could have fucked with people and named this pod that. Like, what the fuck?
10 ribs and all, carrot pod. Yeah. That would have been one hell of a series name. But yes, I'll send you the link after this. It's on the deluxe edition. It's cool, but it should not have been on the album. And I don't think they had it. It wasn't done. It was an idea, and John Paul took much more of a lead role for In Through the Outdoor. All right, here are our categories for today. We will begin with Killer Line, which is a mix of the best lyric and delivery, alternative album title, MVP of the album, side A or side B, Dustiest Crumpet, which is worst song, and Spiciest Biscuit, best song. These are, of course, subjective. Now, Ben, should I start Killer Line?
I went first last week.
Okay, cool. I will start then. All right, so I was thinking about this, and I like the lyrical things he's doing in Hot Song for Nowhere, but I couldn't, off the top of my head, pick one. So I went and read through the lyrics, and this couplet stood out to me. The sun in my soul's sinking lower, while the hope in my hands turns to clay. The way he delivers it adds a little bit of a bounce to it. So despite that heaviness of the lyric, the sun in my soul sinking lower, while the hope in my hands turns to clay. That's a dark thought, right? And yet this song is bouncing and he's delivering it with enough swagger where I never realized after all these years that that was what he said. So I kind of discovered that line while reading through them today. So that is my killer line from Hot Song for Nowhere.
Love that. As I said, this was difficult, so this one might be bluntly obvious as well. But mine comes from T for One. How come 24 hours, baby?
Slip into days.
Time seem to slip into days. Oh, 24 hours, baby. Sometimes seem to slip into days. I was like, really the only one that you could take any presence from, so to speak, in terms of having been there or done that. And if you've experienced a life event that makes you seem like the hours are slipping into days, it just kind of resonated with me. So
yeah,
and I love that song and just the way he delivers those specific lyrics. So
a simple but profound lyric. I like that one too, and
it wasn't too hard for me to grab those.
Yeah. I was considering one from T for One, and really, there's not a lot of lyrics for as long as it is.
Oh, right.
Yeah. All right, alternative album title. You lead off here.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you were going to go ahead and address the album art at any time.
I will when it gets to me, if that's okay.
Cool. Well, I'm going to just go ahead and steal your thunder because mine is just simply the obelisk.
Okay.
You know, I took it for what the visionary facet of the album cover is and what the hell is that thing whenever you actually look at it. I think you could probably look at that album cover 100 times and not realize there's a black obelisk sitting on the table. It's perfectly almost blended where it just looks like a family sitting at a table outside of a marina or something. And that's the first probably 100 times that I'd ever looked at the album as a kid even. And then started to dive into this album and realized there's something sitting in the middle of the table, which was like, holy shit, I've probably looked at that thing 1,000 times. And then you look at it and then you're like, well, I need to know what the fuck that is, which probably everybody else did too, that actually took time to stop and take a gander. So its object seems too obvious, but I would just call it the obelisk.
I like that. Mine's not that dissimilar. Mine's Monolith. And that is a callback to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is what influenced the album art anyways. So Hypnosis, if we're going to talk about the album art real quick, Hypnosis designed it. And they also did Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. And if you look at the covers back next to each other, color-wise and the way they frame the middle image, they're very similar. But Wish You Were Here has the striking image of the guy with this business suit who's on fire, shaking hands with the other person, the faceless person, I think. And then this one just has a family, like you said, eating in a marina with this black obelisk on the table. So that was a direct pull from 2001. That was what influenced the designers. And I think I think Presence is a perfect name for this album because the band was referencing the fact that the four of them together on the stage in the studio, there was a presence about Led Zeppelin that you couldn't quite put your finger on. The title's perfect. I wouldn't change it. But I think Monolith came to my mind just because it has this vibe of something large and big. And Zeppelin was the biggest band in the world. They were monolithic in the rock industry, and it kind of matched the obelisk and the 2001 connection there. So you went with the obelisk, I went with Monolith. I think our minds were both on the same page there.
And I know we've discussed Hypnosis before, but what legends, dude. I mean, Pink Floyd, T-Rex, Sabbath, ELO, Alan Parsons Project.
Yeah, oh God. I love Alan Parsons Project.
AC/DC. I mean, they were all over the fucking place.
Yeah,
and these are three dudes that decided to not take personal claim to these things either. Just Hypnosis, which is incredible Think about, man. I mean, that could be such a forgotten element to how many great album covers they've done. Maybe that was purposeful, but Jesus, dude,
There
like
was a documentary I've yet to see, but it's about hypnosis and their history.
Storm Thorgerson,
Yep.
Aubrey Powell, and Peter Christopherson, uh, all the way through to 1983. Man, they just have their hands in so much shit. That's
Yep.
crazy.
Classic album covers. All right, my turn to start here with MVP. All right, initially my choice was going to be Jimmy Page because this is a guitar-heavy album, and I think Jimmy is fantastic. But the more that I thought about it and the direction of this album and what it became and why it is meaningful in the Zeppelin canon, I kept going back to Robert Plant. I think that lyrically, it's very strong. I think that while his voice is not the peak that it was in 1971, is still pretty darn good, and I think that he gave it everything that he could given the circumstances. I grew, as this might sound really naive, I grew to respect Robert Plant more as an individual through listening to this album and understanding where he was coming from. And thinking, you know what, if I were to hang out with one of the Zeppelin guys now or even back then, I think it'd be Robert. And I'll give you one more nugget about that, Ben. On the Led Zeppelin Reddit, someone posted about an interaction with Robert in Wolverhampton, which is where he resides or near it, and that's where his favorite football club team is. He might even be part owner. But apparently, residents in this community, they'll run into Robert, and he is nothing but the nicest guy in the world, and very self-deprecating and just very chill, a true English gentleman.
Yeah.
I buy it. I totally buy that. So I'm not giving him this MVP because I think, oh, he's a nice guy. But I think that this album is all about his humanity. And he didn't let us in all that much to it before this. And this album, as you said, is literal. This is who I am. This is what's pissing me off. This is what I'm thinking about. And I think it's compelling. So I got to give Robert the shout out here. Led Zeppelin 3 is his best vocal performance. I think this album is his best lyrical performance.
Yeah. Prior to even touring the world, he always seemed like a worldly, like vagabond, one that just had years of experience beyond what a human of that age could encapsulate. And what's odd is I think he always had wings in terms of freedom of feeling like he hadn't even scraped the surface on what the capabilities were. Ironically, this album sort of put him in a box. Like he was forced to do things without the ability to go wander, to go experience, to put that into his writing. So he was kind of taking a nod from what they'd done and what they'd truly experienced at like ground level and threw it out. If I were to have known the journey that they were on to get here, I probably would have been about the same path as you.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
he's incredible on it. After the storytelling of tonight, I also do. Not that I didn't beforehand. That directional facade that he put on and where the lyrics and the songwriting and everything was going was definitely my second choice. My first though was John Bonham, and it's from the stamina of this album, man. I mean, if you go from Achilles Last Stand, just to kick things off, I told you when we started this that I took that as an album release track that was probably done a handful of times. And then I watched the Nebworth show and I was like, fuck,
Yeah,
they
he
replicated
goes
this
for
thing live, and Bonham was the same the entire time through. I mean, so that's where it started. Then Nobody's Fault for Mine. The rhythmic call and response where he's now on another level, and then T for One, and where he takes it on his own, and then everything else trickled within. I heavily enjoyed going back and like forcing myself to just listen to as much Bonham as possible, isolated. And it doesn't take anything away from the other boys, but it's just hard not to look past like what his input on this album was and what it ended up being because of him. So
Good choice. All right. Side A or side B? You don't have many tracks to choose from here, so.
right, and it was split decision if you took tracks 1 through 4,
Me too.
but side A.
Side A. Okay, so the strength of I think I understand which two probably. Though you did speak highly of the third track as well. I went side B, and it was a split decision as well. I think that this album is for 7 tracks pretty well balanced, and it was not an easy choice, but I find side B one that I go back to more, especially for 2 songs, but even a third. So, all right, Dustiest. Well, I guess I'm going to do my rankings now, right? Then you.
Yeah, that's right.
Before we do, quick prediction time.
Yeah.
Predict what you think my Dustiest Crumpet, worst song, and Spiciest Biscuit, best song will be. I'll do the same for you. So what are your predictions for me?
I think your Dustiest Crumpet will be Candy Store Rock,
Okay.
and I think your Spiciest Biscuit is T for one.
Okay. I think your Spiciest Biscuit is Nobody's Fault But Mine. I think your Dustiest Crumpet is also Candy Store Rock.
All right.
All right, here are we only got 7, so this won't take too long. Number 7, Dustiest Crumpet is, in fact, Candy Store Rock. I don't dislike it. It doesn't really go anywhere. It's more of a vibe, and I enjoy it when I listen to it, but it's filler. Number 6.
With 7 tracks here, this is extremely difficult to
I know, yeah.
put them, but there's no choice. So
Number 6 is Royal Orleans. I think it's a fun song. I think it does capture New Orleans. I don't go back to it a ton, but when I do, I enjoy it. And I think that it's got more life to it than Candy Store Rock. So I gave it a bit of an edge there. But those two, I think, are by far the weakest tracks on the album. I really enjoy the other 5. Really, really enjoy. All right, number 5, T for One.
wow.
Yeah. It's no slight against it. I think that I enjoy listening to it in a state of mind. I love the riff at the beginning, but as a blues song, I enjoy it too. I don't think it is necessarily a great composition. And if someone were to say they find it boring, I wouldn't say, oh, you're wrong. That's subjective. I enjoy the vibe. I just don't think it is up there with their best.
Sure.
I still think it's really good, though. All right, number 4. This has grown on me. For Your Life. Great rock song. Sardonic lyrics from Robert. I appreciate it. I love 3 through 1, okay? Like, I love these 3 songs. I think they're up there for Zeppelin. Hot Song for Nowhere, number 3. Number 2, Achilles Last Stand. My Spiciest Biscuit is Nobody's Fault But Mine. And here's why I chose it over Achilles Last Stand and Hot Song for Nowhere, which I'd say 1A, B, and C. I think that's how close these songs are. And I wish Hot Song for Nowhere got more love from people. I wanted to give it Spiciest Biscuit. But Nobody's Fault But Mine, to me, is Zeppelin at their most powerful. I think it's 6.5 minutes of just fucking awesome rock. And it is powerful when the harmonica solo kicks in. Chills. I think it is. I think it's a masterpiece. That's hyperbole, maybe. I think it's a better song than Achilles Last Stand. And maybe if Achilles Last Stand were 7 minutes instead of 10.5, I would put it up there. I just think that it could have gotten chopped a little bit. We wouldn't have lost anything. I wouldn't change a thing about Nobody's Fault But Mine. So that's my Spiciest Biscuit.
I love it, man. It's kicking off the list. I was thinking, oh shit, we're in dangerous territory of being exactly aligned, and then
Did it divert quite a bit?
did it ever? So
Okay, let's hear it. All right.
so Candy Store Rock.
Yeah,
Crumpet.
it's fine.
Royal Orleans.
Okay,
6.
so we agree those are the 2 weakest tracks. No slight to them, but
A slight, man. And like I said, I think I gave flowers to Royal Orleans in our description going track by track. I am in New Orleans with them. I understand what's going on and the aftermath of having a beloved brother that, stepped into a situation. But nonetheless, when it comes to the 5 tracks that supersede those two. It's a no-brainer.
Agreed.
Here's where things took a turn. Hot Song for Nowhere.
Oh, okay. That's fair, though.
4, Nobody's Fault But Mine.
Wow. Okay.
I love it, man. I do, but it doesn't resonate with me the same way it does with you. I think also it's perfect Zeppelin song. But the 3 that superseded that fit the bill more for my
So
foundation of what Led Zeppelin is.
you have Achilles Last Stand, For Your Life, and T for One available, correct?
Right.
Okay, and what did I predict it to be your Spiciest Biscuit?
You predicted Nobody's Fault But Mine.
Okay. If I were to revise that prediction, I'm going to go scratch here and say Achilles Last Stand, but I give it back over to you.
Got it. Number 3, Achilles Last Stand.
Shit!
Number 2, T for One.
Wow.
For Your Life, dude. I have the same. If you cut and pasted my description minus the harmonica for Nobody's Fault, I think For Your Life is a flawless Led Zeppelin song.
It's really good.
So I couldn't escape it, man. I kept revising and going through, and I don't typically like go through my rankings and scratch off and stuff. So when I mean revised, I go pretty much bottom to top every time. And as you go up, it starts to get tougher because you have fewer and fewer tracks to dip into. And like I told you last week and the weeks before, it becomes a this versus that battle when you get up there.
Yep.
It continued to win and win and win. And it was my initial gut perception, so much so that of all albums so far, I was going to write down my Spiciest Biscuit first because I knew that there was almost no competition. But I continued to listen. I was like, maybe I'm just fooling myself right now, and something else is going to rise to the top. T for One at 2 was kind of inescapable for me, and it wasn't 2 because it was close to being my Spiciest Biscuit. It was 2 because of the resilience of what the track is on this album for me. So, and then obviously Achilles Last Stand for most is something that they write home about with this album. And I don't disagree that this is a powerhouse tune that will never underdeliver. So for it to be sitting at 3, it is not my argument that we have to preface this now because we do have listeners and downloaders who have taken to the Reddit and let us know their thoughts. There is no part of me that is saying that this is not the best track on the album.
Correct.
The argument here is that we are placing what resonates with us and what our favorite tune is amongst the others and what riffs really encapsulate to us what this album means. So to me, For Your Life did that. But this was a gauntlet, dude, with only 7 tracks. I thought going into Physical Graffiti, there was going to be an essence that was going to be tough only because of the sheer length and how many tracks that we had to maneuver through. That shit was easy, dude. This was like 7 tracks. Where do you stick these things, man? So,
and some dense tracks too, where you kind of got to like expose yourself to it a few times, right? And I enjoyed going over this album because there was a freshness. Even I've listened to it probably many more times than you have over the years, but despite that, I have not listened to this as much as other Zeppelin albums, just kind of by osmosis. I mean, classic rock radio is not playing Presence tracks. It's just not. So you have to find it. You have to go seek it out. And I think when you do, you're rewarded. And what I'm excited for next week when we wrap up Zeppelin with In Through the Outdoor, it is a lesser work in some aspects. We will do a final album ranking. I'm going to be intrigued to see because I think there can be a debate about between this and, let's say, a Houses of the Holy, which many consider a classic.
Yeah.
I think there can be some leeway here as to, well, which one do you actually think is better? Because while this didn't hit at the time like Houses of the Holy did, I think it's aged better in many ways.
I've already thought to myself how I'm going to do the run through personally, and very similar to how I do, an album run through and then start picking out the tracks. But I think what I'm going to ultimately have to do for that one is go album by album and sort of take the top ranked tracks from each album and then weigh those in terms of the number of those albums that songs that I couldn't do without.
Yeah, sure.
And that's ultimately going to deliver what I feel will be number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. But lastly, man, I reverting back to When the Levee Breaks and just this mini series that we're on right now, the bachelor party that I went on this past weekend was to Mr. Craig Johnson, who is a listener, and so much of a listener. Didn't know if you were aware of this, but Craig is subscribed to a vinyl collecting club, and he gets like 2 or 3 albums a month, and you can pick and choose like which ones you hope you get, but it's kind of like run of the mill, but it's like an annual subscription fee, and then you get, like 3 albums a month no matter what. Cool. And his collection's massive and loves music. He doesn't really watch shows or, do the flavor of the month of what shows are you guys watching now. He doesn't really
Smart
turn
man. You know what? I got to be honest. I'm sick of TV. I'm goddamn sick of it. So I appreciate Craig.
Absolutely, and he just doesn't turn it on. You know him. He's always down to roll. Tomorrow, when I wake up tomorrow, it's 311 day. We're going to 311 at Earth Day. Shout out Craig. We're going to 311 dinner and 311 at Iroquois Amphitheater. But long story short, it was his bachelor party. Big year for Craig. He's getting married this year, and we were at his bachelor party, and we're out in a boat, and this boat is a mastercraft. It's like unbelievable machine. Peanut butter leather interior, Louisville red and black exterior. It's called the Ville Inn, like Louisville Inn. And right when we get there, man, we arrive on Friday. It's me, Slats, Keith, Luke Hare, and Mr. Craig Johnson. And it's like, well, before everybody arrives and everybody gets settled, let's hop in the boat and, go out. And Craig just bangs on When the Levee Breaks, and we're backing the boat out of the slip, and the lake is it's Barren River Lake in Louisville, in Kentucky. There was not a single, on a Friday, the weekend before 4th of July, there was not one single other boat on the lake. Not one. So it was us. And we took off, and When the Levee was just banging in this boat, and I'm thinking, we talked a lot about this track. We talked a lot about this band and this album specifically, but never how this track would sound flying down the lake.
Sounds great on a boat. Sounds great.
Sound was pure. It was like it, because a boat's pretty much its own speaker. So every sound, it just was impossible not to have a smile on your face. And I'm thinking, man, this one hits hard. But Craig let me know that he's never listened to a podcast before, not one time. He's never experienced a podcast. So whenever he dove into Led Zeppelin 1 for us, went top to bottom, and he just throws it on in the car when he's driving to and from work or wherever. Yeah. Stuff, and really has heavily enjoyed it. So shout out to Craig. Happy birthday tomorrow.
Yeah, happy birthday, Craig.
And man, When the Levee Breaks, if you are or ever have the means to be in a boat, throw that fucker on.
We've done that on my brother-in-law Tim's boat. It's pretty sick. All right, so we're going to wrap it up next week. We got In Through the Outdoor. We're going to do a final album ranking. No coda, and I think Zeppelin fans will be totally fine with that. It's not much to say about it. So we will do some final rankings. We'll figure out some categories to wrap up the Zeppelin series before we move on to our second series, which we will let you know what that is. But we're going to stay mum on that for now. But for tonight, as we wrap up the album number 7 for Zeppelin, Presence from 1976. Had a good time doing it, Ben. I think we gave it its due respect.
Agreed. Drop the Needleheads with Schmiggy and Yahtzee. Record spin, the bourbon flows, and for the time being, and one more episode of this mini-series, breakdowns are deeper than John Bonham's bass drum. It's been real. I am looking forward to putting a bow on this, to be honest with you, man. It's been absolutely pleasurable, but
we got other artists to talk about, man.
We do, and I think we've done Zeppelin well. I'm looking forward to capping off the last album because I'm excited about it, but I'm also really looking forward to moving on to uncharted territory and seeing how that flows, and it's been a blast. So until next week, I do have to say to you and our listeners, happy 4th of July.
Yeah, they'll be getting this, I think, the mid-July. But I like the fact that we recorded this with that kind of specter of a big summer holiday, because to me, Zeppelin's a great summer band. I'm also excited the fact that our next band is going to be very much associated with the summer of 2025 for many
Absolutely.
music fans.
It's interesting we're doing this at this exact time. This would be like absolutely an easy thing, and will be an easy thing, as we're blasting into the winter, because it's winter, man. It's like, hey, I'm going to hole up in the basement for 2-3 hours and I can get this done. But as you're maneuvering summer, there's so many things. Like this week, Thursday, my wife's off work, but I'm not, right? Friday, I'm off work. My wife is not. It's 4th of July. Got the kiddos. We're going to do some activities. In the weekend, you have invites to damn near everything you could possibly ever want. And there becomes this looseness to life where you're like, oh man, there's just a bevy of things. And, it needs to be noted that we're only 10 days away from, right now, we'll be back at the hotel, potentially having a nightcap.
Potentially, we will be.
Well, yeah, that, or I'm just going to be already asleep at almost midnight on.
That could be, yeah.
On my 39th birthday of night one of Dave Matthews,
which would be only fair.
Here we are, man. We're steamrolling this, and I'm really enjoying it. It's been really cool to see the reception so far from listeners afar, and some really good critical feedback too. And then knowing that we can take that into account and really put it to work here is awesome. But all the way distilled down to what we're doing, just chatting with you, it is something that beyond everything, feel very blessed, because I look forward to a lot in life, but this has just become that weekly thing where it's like anything else.
Got to do it.
Such a welcome day. I wake up and I think you and I text each other pretty
game
early
day.
on these pod days, game day, and feel it all day. So it's cool.
All right, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your summer. We will be back next week. We're going to wrap this sucker up with In Through the Outdoor from 1979. Maybe, Ben, as we're wrapping it up, it'll be a preview for the fact that we'll see Fool in the Rain performed by Dave Matthews Band yet again at Deer Creek. In the meantime, everybody, enjoy the 4th. Well, you already would have by the time you hear this. And we look forward to wrapping this up and moving on to other artists as well. It is Drop the Needleheads.
Drop the needleheads. Drop